Hey everyone, if you enjoy my park ranger horror stories, I've started uploading them on Spotify too. My YouTube channel got demonetized, so I'm putting a lot more focus into Spotify now. You'll find daily scary stories there with longer, darker, and more immersive horror content. If you want to support the channel, please go follow the Spotify page and leave a 5-star rating. It genuinely helps me keep making these stories. The Spotify link is in the description and pinned comment. Turn off the lights. Put on your headphones and I'll see you there. My name is Jacob Whitmore, and I've been a forest ranger in Daniel Boone National Forest for 14 years. I'm 40 years old, and I've led more than 80 successful rescue missions in the River Gorge. I tell you this not to brag, but because you need to understand that I'm not the kind of person who panics easily or believes in things that can't be explained. I was raised by a mother and grandfather in Hazard, Kentucky. My father died in a coal mining accident when I was 11. That loss taught me early that the real world is hard and dangerous, but it's at least real. I trusted facts. I trusted what I could see and measure and prove. I still do, mostly. It was June when everything changed. Early summer in the gorge is beautiful. The temperature hangs around 70 degrees, and the humidity makes everything green and alive. But that year, we'd had heavy rains. The Red River was running high and fast, carving through the 600-foot deep gorge like it was angry at the world. Crescent Ridge overlooks the gorge from about 1,200 feet up. It's 8 miles from the nearest ranger station. And from there, you can see for miles if the fog clears. The ridge has been drawing people for thousands of years. Native Americans left signs they were there. Civil War soldiers marched through. Later, coal miners carved into the earth below. All of these people left their marks on this place. I'd spent my off days for the past 5 years exploring the caves around Crescent Ridge. I have maps, old ones and new ones, showing passages that go down into the earth like roots. Some passages lead where you'd expect, some don't. But I've never been afraid of the dark or the caves. Not until that June. The town people used to tell stories about Crescent Ridge. My grandfather mentioned them when I was a kid. Stories about a thing that wore a crown made of bone. Something that hunted from the ridge at night. Stories about soldiers who walked into the area and walked out wrong, or didn't walk out at all. Tales about hunters finding animal bodies arranged in patterns, laid out like some kind of warning or message. My grandfather said people saw things on that ridge that didn't belong to the natural world. I laughed at those stories. I thought they were just fear, the kind of fear that comes from living in isolation in hard country. I thought they were the stories people tell when life is already harsh, to explain why it's so harsh. Folklore doesn't explain anything real. It just lets scared people feel less alone. I was wrong about that. The first sign that something was different came when the missing persons report came in at 6 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. 4 hikers hadn't returned to their hotel in Slade. The group had planned a 3-day trip through Crescent Ridge and hadn't checked out. The hotel called the local sheriff. The sheriff called me. I gathered a search team quickly. Patricia Durham, a ranger I'd worked with for 8 years, Marcus Jefferson, our naturalist, and Dr. Raymond Price, who runs the environmental science program at a nearby college and volunteers with us sometimes. We were ready to move by 6:30 a.m. The weather was clear, which was lucky. The gorge can trap fog that makes it impossible to see 50 feet in front of you. But that morning, visibility was good. The sun was coming up through the trees, painting the ridge gold and green. It looked peaceful. It looked normal. As we drove toward the trailhead, Patricia kept tapping the dashboard with her fingers. "You feel it?" she asked. "Feel what?" I said. "Like something's off, like the air is different." I didn't say anything, but she was right. I had noticed it, that faint sense that the day was slightly wrong, like a photograph of something familiar that's just a little out of focus. But I put it down to adrenaline. Missing hikers meant urgency, it meant focus. We found their camp at around 8 a.m., a quarter mile from the trailhead, right at the base of Crescent Ridge itself. That's when the wrongness became impossible to ignore. The camp was destroyed, but not by animals. The sleeping bags were shredded, torn apart deliberately. Backpacks were ripped open, their contents scattered. But here's what was strange. There was no blood. No bear attack leaves a camp this neat. A real animal attack is messy and chaotic. This was organized, purposeful. The hiker's journal was still there, half buried under a torn tent. Patricia found it first and read through the pages as we stood around the dead. Campfire, her face went pale. "Listen to this," Patricia said, reading aloud. "Day 1, something is watching. We can feel it. The animals are acting strange. All the birds stopped singing an hour ago." She turned the page. The handwriting got worse. shakier, harder to read. Day 2. Every path loops back to the same place. We've tried 3 different routes. They all bring us back here. The shadows are wrong. They're too dark, too solid. Something is on the ridge. We can feel its eyes on us. The final entry was nearly illegible, written in a panic. It's on the ridge. We can see its eyes.
God, its eyes.
They reflect light like a predator's eyes, but it looks like a deer. No, not like anything. It's wrong. It's wrong, and it's watching, and it's waiting. It's hunting us. God help us. God help. The entry stopped mid-word. Marcus knelt down and examined the ground. Tracks, he said quietly. Come look at this. We gathered around. In the soft earth near the camp, there were prints. They were large, larger than any normal animal. The shape was wrong too, symmetric in a way animal prints never are. The claw marks were too precise, like they were made by something with purpose and control. What kind of animal makes prints like that? I asked Marcus. He didn't answer right away. Nothing that should be in Kentucky, he finally said. Dr. Price was examining something in the grass near the tent. He straightened up slowly, and in his hand was an object made of bone. It looked like it was constructed from antler and vertebrae, all fitted together into something that resembled a crown. Not a perfect crown. The points curved at angles that hurt to look at, bending in directions that bone shouldn't bend. But there was no question what it was meant to look like. A crown. Patricia stepped back. I want to leave, she said. We haven't found the hikers yet, I said. I don't care. Jacob, something is wrong here. Can't you feel it? I want to leave. Now. She was right to be scared. The temperature had dropped at least 10 degrees since we arrived, but there were no clouds. The morning sun was still bright, and there was a sound, a low hum that seemed to come from everywhere at once, from the ridge itself. When I concentrated on it, I could almost believe it was aware. Almost believe it was listening to us. Spread out, I said, keeping my voice steady. We need to find those hikers. We searched in a grid pattern, moving slowly through the brush. The forest felt hostile in a way I'd never experienced before. Every shadow seemed to watch us. The trees felt like they were leaning in, listening. The birds really had gone silent, not just quiet, but completely absent. No calls, no movement in the branches. Even the insects seemed to have abandoned the area. About 100 yards from the camp, Marcus stopped. There, he said. A shape was standing at the ridge edge, silhouetted against the sky. It looked like it was facing away from us, looking out over the gorge. At first, thought it was one of the missing hikers, but the proportions were wrong. The head was too large, and it was crowned. The thing on its head caught the light in ways that made my eyes water. Don't move, I said, drawing my radio. But when I pressed the button, all I heard was static mixed with something else. Underneath the white noise, there were sounds. Not words exactly, but something that almost felt like communication. Like whatever was making that sound was aware of me using the radio. I released the button. The figure on the ridge turned its head, not like a person turns their head. More like a predator rotating to get a better look at prey. That's when I saw its eyes. Even from 100 yards away, I could see them clearly. They reflected the morning light, yellow and green like a cat's eyes. But underneath that reflection was something that radiated pure intelligence. Predatory focus. Hunger. Patricia screamed. The thing was no longer on the ridge. It was 30 feet in front of us, and I have no memory of how it moved there. One moment it was distant. The next, it was close. Impossible close. Reality seemed to stutter. The first hiker, a woman named Jennifer Lowell, according to the missing persons report, was behind us. She was attempting to climb the sheer cliff face that dropped away toward the gorge. Her fingers and feet scrabbled at the rock, finding no purchase, but she kept climbing as if she could. Blood dripped from her fingertips. Marcus ran toward her, trying to pull her away from the edge. He grabbed her arm, and she screamed, a sound of absolute terror that didn't sound fully human. The thing on the ridge watched. We found the other hikers scattered across the ridge like pieces of a terrible puzzle. David Morris was in a circular clearing, 20 feet across, with nothing growing in it. His body was arranged in a specific pattern, arms out, legs extended, positioned with exact precision. He was alive, but his eyes were open and empty. When I approached him, he spoke a single word, over and over. Crown, 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 never loud, never urgent, just constant and mechanical and terrifying. The fourth hiker, Linda Foster, was somehow standing on a rock outcropping that hung out over the gorge. No path led there. No logical way to reach it. But she stood there with her toes at the edge, staring down into the darkness below. Michael Chen, the first of the four, was also standing at a ridge edge, facing out, completely still. We tried to bring them back. Patricia grabbed Linda's arm and pulled her away from the edge, and the woman came, but she fought the entire way, desperate to get back to that overlook. She screamed about needing to go back, about the beautiful thing that was calling to her. By the time we got her away from the ridge, she was catatonic, unresponsive to everything. Marcus touched the bone crown object, and something broke inside him. He started laughing, but the sound wasn't right. He kept picking it up and putting it down, unable to let it go, unable to look away from it. His eyes got that same empty quality as the other hikers. "We need to get down the mountain," Dr. Price said, "now. Whatever this is, we need to get down now." But the ridge wouldn't let us leave the way we came. The path looped back on itself. We'd walk for what felt like 5 minutes and end up back at the clearing with David Morris. The geography was changing. Distances were wrong. A cliff face appeared where there had been open ground. A ravine materialized in front of us. And watching from different points on the ridge, always at a distance we couldn't close, was the thing. It never approached directly. It didn't need to. Its presence was pressure, a weight that pushed down on your mind. The longer we were on that ridge, the less sense everything made. Time became meaningless. I'd check my watch and 20 minutes had passed, when it felt like 2. Then 5 minutes would feel like hours. Patricia was crying, not from fear exactly, but from a kind of psychological exhaustion. Her rational mind couldn't process what she was experiencing. She kept asking me what was happening, and I couldn't answer because I didn't know. Then I saw it clearly. It stood on an outcropping above us, and for the first time I got a full look. The body was deer-like, 4 legs, that general shape, but the structure was wrong. The bones didn't fit together correctly. The angles were asymmetrical. The head was too large, and the neck was too long and bent at an angle that would have broken a normal animal. And the crown was immense up close. It was constructed from bone and antler, and something else. Something crystalline that caught light from sources that didn't exist. The points curved in directions that shouldn't be possible. As I watched, one of the points seemed to shift, bending through space in a way that made my eyes hurt. Embedded in some of those points were fragments of things that looked like they had been bone once. Small pieces, fragments of something that might have been human. The creature's eyes met mine, and I understood something in that moment. It recognized me. It knew my name. It knew that I'd come to this place countless times over the past 5 years. It knew that I'd dismissed the stories about it. It knew that I had disrespected its territory by treating it as just another hiking spot, just another area to explore and map and document. It had been waiting for me specifically. The ridge seemed to tilt. The sky changed color, not to anything natural, but to a sickly violet that made my head ache. I understood then that the ridge wasn't physical in the way I understood physics. It was a space where the thing lived, where it was in complete control, where the rules of reality bent to its will. One of the catatonic hikers, David Morris, suddenly stood up with disturbing coordination. He wasn't moving like a human anymore. His movements were too smooth, too efficient. He began walking toward the gorge edge, and I realized what was happening. He was no longer David Morris. What wore his body was something else. I grabbed him, tried to hold him back. His skin was cold, so cold it burned. He turned and looked at me with eyes that were no longer his, and I felt something like understanding pass between us. The creature was showing me what it could do. It could take people. It could wear them like clothes. It could make them walk off cliffs while they screamed inside, trapped in their own failing minds. Dr. Price was documenting everything in his notebook, writing frantically even as his hands shook. "Entity shows clear predatory intelligence," he muttered. "Apex predator behavior, establishes dominance through psychological rather than physical means, feeds on fear, or possibly on consciousness itself. The hikers' bodies remain, but the actual people are gone. We have to go," Patricia said. Her voice was flat, broken. "Jacob, we have to leave right now, or we're never leaving." She was right. We were running out of time. The sun was getting lower, and the shadows were getting longer, and they were moving in ways shadows shouldn't move. The air itself was becoming thicker, harder to breathe, and the crown, the creature still held it in that terrible paw, and I couldn't look away from it. Those bones set into the crystalline structure. Those fragments that might have been people. We moved fast, half carrying Marcus, who had gone completely unresponsive. Patricia was muttering to herself, repeating words that didn't make sense. Only Dr. Price and I remained fully conscious and aware, and I could feel both of us fracturing under the pressure of what we were experiencing. The path down the ridge finally appeared, a narrow trail that led steeply downward. I didn't question why it had appeared. I just took it. But as we descended, the thing followed. Not aggressively. It never seemed aggressive. It just maintained a constant distance, watching, always watching. The pressure in my mind grew until I wanted to scream, wanted to go mad, wanted to do anything that would make it stop. At one point, halfway down, I stopped. I turned around and faced the creature directly for the first time while we were mobile. "Why?" I asked. The word came out hoarse, barely a whisper. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, without sound, completely without sound, I understood. Not words exactly. It was more like the understanding just appeared in my mind. "This is my territory. You disrespected it. You walked through it as if it was empty, as if it belonged to you. I am the apex here. Never you." The message came with images. Flashes of the ridge through centuries. Indigenous hunters who revered the thing left it offerings. Civil War soldiers who felt its presence and fled, driven mad by the recognition of something superior. Miners who went into caves and didn't come out, broken by contact with a consciousness that dwelt in stone and shadow. The crown was not decoration. It was trophy. Every point held a fragment of something that had challenged the creature's dominance. Something that hadn't understood that the ridge belonged to the thing that wore the crown. And the creature was showing me that I had a choice. Submit. Acknowledge its superiority. Leave the ridge and never return, never speak of it, let it exist in the territory it had claimed. Or join the others, the 4 hikers, the missing people from decades past, the ones whose fragments decorated that terrible crown. "We're going," I said aloud. "We're leaving. We're never coming back." The pressure eased, just slightly. The creature watched as we continued down the trail. We reached the base of the ridge at sunset. Patricia collapsed as soon as we hit flatter ground. Marcus was breathing but unresponsive, his eyes open but seeing nothing. Dr. Price immediately began making radio calls for emergency assistance, telling them we needed medical evacuation immediately. This time, the radio worked fine. The emergency response took 2 hours. Helicopter evacuation took another hour after that. By the time we reached the hospital, Marcus had lapsed into a catatonia that mimicked the 4 hikers he'd lost his mind trying to rescue. Patricia spent 3 months in psychiatric care, and even now she has panic attacks if you mention the mountains. The official story was that the hikers had suffered a shared psychotic episode, triggered by stress and isolation. The 4 who had been found catatonic were treated and released, though they never fully recovered. They live in group homes now, unable to care for themselves, speaking only when directly addressed, their minds seemingly locked behind doors that can't be opened. Marcus's condition was attributed to a previous heart condition that triggered a stroke. He's alive, but the Marcus I knew is gone. Dr. Price published papers about shared psychotic episodes in hikers. He returned to normal life, or at least the appearance of normal. But I saw him once at a ranger station, staring at a map of Crescent Ridge, and his hands were shaking. He knows what we encountered. He's trying to rationalize it, but it's destroying him from the inside. I never returned to Crescent Ridge. The trail is still open officially, but rangers avoid it. We tell visitors that the terrain is unstable, that there have been minor slides. It's not entirely a lie. I continued as a ranger, but something in me had changed fundamentally. I couldn't look at the wilderness the same way. I had always seen it as a resource to be managed, terrain to be mapped and documented. But the ridge had taught me something crucial. Not all wild places are empty. Not all territories are available for human use. Some places have owners. The creature on Crescent Ridge didn't leave after our encounter. I know this because I watch the reports. Every few years, hikers get lost in that area. Some are found catatonic, some aren't found at all. The local tribes have added new warnings to their territories. Warnings not to camp on Crescent Ridge during the solstices or equinoxes when the creature seems strongest. I've spent the last 15 years studying similar accounts. Other mountains in Kentucky and Tennessee, other ridges across Appalachia, other wilderness areas in Colorado, Washington, Oregon. The details vary, but they're consistent. A presence that hunts apex predators, that establishes dominance through fear, that wears a crown made from those who didn't understand they were outmatched. We treat wilderness as if it's dead space, waiting for human use. We hike where we want, camp where we want, take photographs, and document things that perhaps shouldn't be disturbed. But what if the wilderness isn't empty? What if some places have been occupied by intelligences that exist just outside our understanding? Entities that have claimed territory and are willing to defend it. The creature on Crescent Ridge didn't attack us out of evil. It was defending its home. I think about the bone crown often. I think about those fragments. I think about David Morris or Michael Chen or Jennifer Lowell, still alive somewhere in group homes. Their consciousness locked away where the creature trapped it. I think about the warning that understanding gave me. This territory belongs to something older and greater than you. If you cannot respect that, you will become part of its warning to others. If you're reading this, understand that not all mountains are safe. Not all wilderness is available for conquest. If you're planning a trip to Crescent Ridge, or to any place where the stories tell of things watching from ridges, think carefully about what you're really doing. You might be intruding on territory claimed by something that will remind you, with absolute clarity, that humans are not the apex predators in every corner of this world. Some places belong to older things. Respect the ridge. My name is Eleanor Hartwell, and I've been a park ranger for 17 years. I know that might not sound like much, but I've hiked more than 1,000 miles across America's mountains. I've seen bears stand on their back legs. I've watched thunderstorms roll in from 50 miles away. I've rescued hikers who thought they were about to die. I've seen things that most people would never believe, the kind of things you see when you spend enough time alone in wild places. But I never believed in monsters. My father was a ranger too. He worked these mountains, Great Smoky Mountains National Park in Tennessee, back in the 1970s and 1980s. He used to tell me stories about the old legends, the things the local people whispered about. Mothman in Point Pleasant, flying creatures that didn't match anything in the bird books. Ghosts of the ancient Cherokee who had lived here long before we did. I listened to those stories when I was young, but I laughed about them. I told myself they were just superstitions, things people made up because they didn't understand nature well enough. I was wrong about that. I grew up here in Tennessee, you see. My father died in 1982. Officially, he fell while hiking near Klingman's Dome, the highest mountain in Tennessee at 6,643 feet. It was ruled an accident. I was 17 when it happened. I left these mountains as soon as I could, went to college, became a ranger myself, and worked in parks all across the country. I spent 30 years away. 30 years telling myself I was running from my job, from one park to another. But really, I was running from the memory of my father and from this mountain. I came back 3 years ago. I don't know exactly why. Maybe it was getting older and realizing you can't run forever. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was something else, something I couldn't explain at the time. I'm good at my job. I've published papers about how animals behave when their habitats change. I've saved 16 people from dangerous situations. I know plants, weather, animal tracks, and the way mountains talk to you if you listen long enough. I wear the Brown Ranger uniform with pride. I carry binoculars, a radio, a first aid kit, and a weather meter on my belt. My notebook is always full of observations. In October 1995, I was leading a wildlife survey team on the high peaks when the call came in. 2 hikers were missing. A young couple, both 19 years old, Jennifer and Marcus. They'd been on the mountain for 2 days on what should have been a routine hike. Their car was still in the parking lot at Newfound Gap Road. Their planned return time had passed 12 hours ago. I volunteered immediately to lead the search team at the summit area. Klingman's Dome is unusual. Most mountains in Appalachia are covered in forests, thick with trees from top to bottom. But Klingman's Dome is different. It's a bald mountain, which means there are no trees at the very top, just exposed rock and low plants that hug the ground to survive the harsh wind. That wind can hit 60 miles per hour on a normal day. In October, when the weather turns unpredictable, it can be dangerous fast. The temperature was dropping as evening came on. The forecast called for fog rolling in around midnight. We had maybe 4 hours of decent visibility to search. I hiked the 3 miles from the ranger station to the summit with 2 other rangers, Jackson, who'd been working here since the 1980s, and a younger ranger named Devin. We moved fast but carefully, the way you do when lives might depend on it. My boots crunched on the rocky path. My radio crackled with updates from the other search teams working lower on the mountain. The summit is beautiful in a harsh way. The sky was gray-blue, and you could see for miles in every direction. The rolling mountains of the Smokies, spreading out like waves. The wind pushed at us constantly, tugging at our jackets and making us lean into our steps. Jackson was quiet beside me. I'd known him for 3 years, but that first day, something seemed different about him. He kept glancing up at the sky like he was looking for something. His jaw was tight. "You ever spent time up here at dusk?" he asked me. "Not much," I said. "Why?" He didn't answer. He just kept hiking. The couple's tent was about half a mile from the summit, tucked into a sheltered spot between rocks. From a distance, it just looked like a small blue shape against the gray stone. As we got closer, I saw something was wrong. The tent was shredded, not torn, like an animal might have torn it while searching for food, not damaged from weather or rough camping. The fabric was hanging in strips from the frame. pulled from the outside inward. The pieces hung from nearby trees and rocks, some of them 20 feet off the ground, fluttering in the wind. "Jesus," Devin whispered. I raised my hand, signaling them to stop. This was a crime scene now, or something worse than that. "Nobody touch anything," I said. "And nobody goes near that yet." I approached slowly, my eyes moving over every detail. The ground around the tent was covered with fallen rocks and old pine needles. There were no bodies, no blood on the torn fabric. No signs of struggle in the dirt, no footprints, no broken branches, nothing disturbed except the tent itself. "Call it in," I told Jackson. "We need the forensics team up here." But then I saw something else. Around the tent, covering the rocks in a circle about 20 feet across, were marks. Deep scratches in the stone, like something with claws had dug into the mountain itself. But these weren't small marks. They were huge, 6 inches deep, spread across rocks in patterns that didn't match any animal I'd ever studied. I crouched down to look closer. Some of the marks looked almost like hands, 5 digits spread wide, pressed with impossible force into solid rock. "Eleanor," Jackson said quietly. He was holding something. It was a journal, a small one, blue, with a water stain across the cover. I took it carefully and opened to the first entry. October 3rd, 1995, Day 1. The hike has been amazing, so peaceful. We set up camp near the summit, and just as the sun was going down, we heard something. Like wind, but not wind. Like breathing? Marcus says I'm being paranoid, but the sound is huge. It's all around us. Like something with wings, but so many wings, the sound is alive. I kept reading. Jennifer's handwriting got shakier as the pages went on. October 4th, we didn't sleep. The sound continued all night. It stopped at dawn. We tried to leave, but Marcus got dizzy right when we started walking. Now we're staying put. Marcus says maybe it's altitude sickness, but I've been to higher mountains. This is different. Something is watching us. I know that sounds crazy, but I can feel it. The last entry was dated just before dawn, in shaky handwriting that was barely legible. October 4th, early morning. It landed outside the tent. I saw its shadow on the fabric. It's real. It's so real. It's trying to get... The entry stopped. My hands were shaking as I closed the journal. "Where are the bodies?" Devin asked. He was pale, scanning the rocks around us. We searched until dark. Other teams on the mountain continued looking through the night with flashlights and headlamps. We found no bodies. We found no blood. We found no sign of Jennifer and Marcus anywhere on that mountain, except for the shredded tent and the marks on the rocks. What we did find was wrong. A portable weather station I'd set up to monitor conditions reported wind speeds of 150 miles per hour. But the surrounding vegetation showed only 30-mile-per-hour winds. Trees nearby swayed gently in the breeze. Yet my equipment insisted that something had hit the area with hurricane force. My radio developed a static problem. Not normal static. Underneath the noise, there were other sounds. Almost like voices. Almost like something trying to speak. By the time full darkness came and we had to abandon the search for the night, I was no longer sure what I believed. The next morning, I hiked to the old fire tower on the summit. It had been built in 1925 and decommissioned in 1984, but it still stood, a tall metal structure with a small cabin at the top. Climbing it was probably against regulations, but I needed a higher vantage point. From the top, I could see the whole summit area spreading out below. I sat there with binoculars, watching, thinking about Jennifer's journal, thinking about the marks in the stone. At dusk, that magic time when day turns to night, something moved between the peak and the clouds. It was massive, a silhouette, nothing more. But the shape was unmistakable. Wings, enormous wings, maybe 20 feet across, beat slowly, deliberately. The creature moved with purpose, like it was patrolling, like it owned the mountain. For 3 seconds, I saw it clearly enough to know it was real. Then fog rolled in from nowhere, thick and gray, and it was gone. I climbed down the tower so fast I nearly fell. My heart was hammering. I told myself I'd seen a hallucination brought on by altitude and fear. I told myself it was a shadow, a trick of the light. I didn't believe myself. That night, I went to Jackson's house off the mountain. He was sitting on his porch, and he didn't seem surprised to see me. "You saw it," he said. It wasn't a question. "I saw something," I said. He nodded slowly. "I've seen it twice. Once in 1982, once in 1989. I've never told anyone." Who would believe me? He told me then about the old ranger, a man named Hartwell who'd worked these mountains before my time. Jackson had only known him briefly, but everyone remembered him as being obsessed with the high peaks. He'd kept journals, documented something. Then, one day, he went hiking on Klingman's dome and didn't come back the same way. He'd died that day. Accident, they said. Hartwell. That was my father's name. I drove to my father's old cabin, which I'd kept but hadn't visited in years. It was small and quiet, sitting on the edge of the park. I hadn't been there since I was 17. I searched through the attic systematically, moving boxes, checking corners, and in a metal box hidden behind a loose board, I found his journals, 17 of them. I opened the most recent one, dated 1982, the year of his death. The first entries were normal, observations about wildlife, weather patterns, hiking notes, but then they changed. June 17, 1982, saw it again. Same area as last month. Huge wingspan, definitely not a bird I recognize. Shape is wrong, something else entirely. July 3 saw it 6 more times this month. It's nesting. It's marked this mountain as territory. July 15, I'm keeping this hidden. Jackson would think I'm crazy. If I put this in the official records, they'd pull my license. But it's real. I know what I've seen. The entries went on, documenting sightings, locations, behavioral patterns. My father had been a scientist about it. He'd tracked the creature methodically, trying to understand it. The final entry was dated August 2, 1982, the day before his death. August 1, 1982, it's not evil, I'm certain of that now. It's territorial. It's protecting something. The hikers we've lost over the years. It's been defending its space. It doesn't understand our world. It only knows that humans are encroaching. It's trying to send a message. It's trying to communicate. Tomorrow I'm going to the summit. Tomorrow I'm going to listen. The entry after that was just a date and a single line. August 2, 1982, it's not a monster, it's a guardian. My father never wrote anything again. Meanwhile, the missing couple's bodies were found the next day by a search team. They were positioned carefully on a high rock outcropping, arranged so they faced the sunset. The official report said they'd fallen. The evidence showed massive lacerations, as if something with enormous claws had killed them. 2 days later, another hiker went missing in the summit area, then another. Both were found the same way, carefully positioned, deliberately arranged, like messages. The Park Service wanted to close the high-altitude trails. Dr. Marcus Webb arrived from the State Wildlife Management Office to figure out what was happening. He was a skeptic, determined to find a rational explanation. Bears, he said, a rogue bear with unusual behavior, or maybe a mountain lion, though lions hadn't been seen in these mountains for a century. I didn't argue with him. I just helped him set up equipment, cameras, weather monitoring stations, sound recorders. That first night, we heard the sound from our camp a mile below the summit. Like wind, but like wings. Like breathing. Like something alive and intelligent and trying to communicate. Webb heard it too. I watched his face. The skepticism faded. Fear moved in. "What is that?" he whispered. "I don't know," I said, but I was lying. Part of me knew exactly what it was. Part of me had always known. On the 5th night, I decided I was done being afraid. I left the camp and climbed toward the summit alone. Webb didn't try to stop me. He actually looked relieved. I carried no weapon. I brought only my father's final journal, open to the last page. As I climbed higher, the weather changed. Fog rolled in around me, but not randomly. It parted in front of me, creating a path. Wind pushed me forward, always toward the summit. It was like the mountain itself was guiding me. The sun was setting when I reached the peak. The sky was burning orange and red, and the clouds were pink. It was beautiful in a way that made my chest hurt. Then it landed in front of me. The creature descended from the clouds with a movement that was graceful and terrible. Its wings, massive, covered in feathers that shifted from brown to gray, spread wide as it lowered itself to the stone. It was maybe 8 feet tall when it stood upright on 2 powerful legs. Its body was covered in feathers, but its arms had fingers, real fingers, with claws. Its face was the most disturbing and beautiful thing I've ever seen. It was part bird, part human. The skull structure was avian, sharp, angular, designed for flight. But the proportions were humanoid. And the eyes. God, the eyes were intelligent. They were sad. It looked at me, and I wasn't afraid anymore. The creature made a sound, the wind sound, the breathing sound. But underneath it, I heard words. Broken words. Slurred, painful to speak. "Your father." He listened. It took a moment for me to understand. The creature was speaking. Actually speaking human words, though it clearly didn't come naturally to it. "You, listen." I found my voice. "Yes," I said. "I'm listening." The creature made more sounds, and slowly, through its fragmented words, and through some understanding I can't quite explain, I pieced together the truth. The creature had been here for over 200 years, maybe longer. It had nested on Klingman's dome since before Tennessee was a state. It was old. It was lonely. It was territorial, because it had to be. Because this peak was its home. And without this mountain, it had nowhere else in the world to exist. My father had understood. He'd climbed to this very spot, and instead of running or fighting, he'd listened. He'd promised to protect the creature's territory. And the creature had accepted him. They'd made a deal somehow, though I didn't understand all of it. When my father died that day in 1982, it wasn't an accident, it was a choice. My father had made a sacrifice to protect the creature and the mountain. I understood that now, reading between the lines of his journals. Your father, the creature said slowly, each word an effort, is part of mountain now. It took a step toward me, and I could have run. Everything in my body was screaming to run. But I thought of my father. I thought of his journals. I thought of the way he'd written with love about this creature, about understanding it, about protecting it. I stayed still. The creature looked at me for a long moment. Then it spoke again. You protect? Like your father? I thought about what that meant. I thought about closing the summit to protect it. I thought about lying to the Park Service. I thought about spending the rest of my life keeping this secret. I thought about all the hikers who would never come to this peak. I thought about all the dangers they wouldn't face. I said yes. The creature made a sound that might have been relief. It spread its massive wings one final time, and they caught the last light of the sunset, glowing like fire. Then it launched itself into the air, catching a wind current I couldn't see, and rose higher and higher until it disappeared into the clouds. I stood alone on Klingman's dome as the last light faded from the sky. I closed the summit to public access 3 weeks later. Official reason: ecosystem restoration. The high-altitude plant community was suffering from human foot traffic. The rare golden eagles needed undisturbed nesting space. We were implementing a new management protocol. Nobody questioned it. The Park Service dealt with it through memos and official channels. Hikers were disappointed, but they accepted it. I submitted a report on the missing hikers. Accidental deaths, I wrote. Extreme weather, difficult terrain, human error. The post-mortem evidence was inconclusive. Sometimes people die in mountains. That's the reality of wild places, Doctor. Webb left and never contacted me again. I don't know if he believed what he saw that night. I don't think he wanted to know. Jackson stopped by my house about a month later. Thank you, he said simply. I realized then that others knew. Probably rangers throughout Appalachia. Probably people who'd taken oaths to protect wild places and understood that sometimes protection meant keeping secrets. That winter, I did something I'd been afraid to do for 32 years. I climbed the mountain again, to the spot where my father had died. I left his journals there, hidden but findable, in a metal box marked only with his initials. For other rangers who need to understand. For people who need to know that some mountains have guardians. A year later, in autumn 1996, I climbed to the summit again. The fog was rolling in, thick and mysterious. I stood at the peak and watched the sky. A massive shadow passed overhead, wings beating slowly. I saw the shape clearly for just a moment. The hybrid face, the intelligent eyes, the feathers glowing in the failing light. The creature looked down at me. An acknowledgement, a promise kept. Then it vanished into the clouds. The mountain is protected, I whispered, as it should be. That night, I started my own journal, and for the next 30 years, I documented everything, every sighting, every sign, every hint that we were living alongside something impossible and beautiful and real. Because the truth is, every major mountain range in Appalachia has one. The Blue Ridge has its guardian. Shenandoah has its protector. All the old wild places have learned to keep their secrets. All we have to do is listen. My name is Samuel Klein, and I'm a search and rescue ranger with the new River Gorge National River in West Virginia. I've been doing this job for 18 years, though I've only worked these particular hollows for the last 4. Before I tell you what happened, I need you to understand who I am, because that matters. It matters a lot. I grew up in coal country. My father went into the mines when I was a kid, and he came out broken. Not physically, not at first, but something about the deep places, the darkness under the earth, it did something to him. I remember him sitting on our porch at night, staring at the mountains, and my mother would ask him what was wrong. He never had an answer. He'd just say, "The feeling is strong today," like the mountains were talking to him and only he could hear. When I was 12, my father went into the mine one morning and never came back out. There was a collapse. 37 men died. They told us it was an accident, bad luck, faulty equipment. But my father's best friend told me something different at the funeral. He said my father had hesitated that morning. He'd stood at the entrance to the shaft and said, "The feeling is stronger than ever. Something's waiting down there." Then he went in anyway. Sometimes I think my father wasn't running away from something. He was running toward it. After that, I couldn't bear the thought of going underground. So at 16, I became a ranger instead. I wanted to work above ground in the light, protecting people from the things that hide in dark places. That's the story I told myself anyway. The truth is, I never really left the mountains. I came back to them the way my father always said people from coal country do. We leave, but we're not gone. Something in these hills calls to us, and we can't ignore it for long. The mountains don't let go easy. When I took the job in the new River Gorge, I thought I was finally home. These hollows, these deep valleys cut into the earth over millions of years, they're beautiful and terrible in equal measure. The new river rushes through them like a vein of life. In spring, when the snowmelt comes down, the river swells and roars. The cliffs rise up on both sides, some of them over 1,000 feet tall. And in the deepest parts, the valleys that twist back into the mountains, it's so dark and quiet that sound gets swallowed. People just appear in places like that. I'm good at my job. I've rescued 34 people from these gorges and hollows. I'm certified in rope rescue, technical climbing, emergency medicine. I know the terrain better than anyone, and I know something about it that I can't explain to anyone without sounding crazy. I can feel the mountains. Not in a mystical way. I'm not that kind of person. I was trained in science and procedure. I follow protocols, but when something is wrong, I know it. My body knows it before my mind catches up. It's the same feeling my father described, I think. A pressure in your chest, a pulling in your gut, an urge to pay attention because something isn't right. I've learned to trust that feeling. It's saved my life more than once. Growing up in coal country, we had stories. Every kid heard them. We talked about the headless horseman, about things that lived in the deep places, creatures that took children who wandered too far from home. I used to think they were just stories, adults told to keep us from getting lost in the woods. I grew up and got educated and learned better, except I didn't, because in the last 4 years working these hollows, I've heard those same stories again from miners and old-timers. They don't tell them like they're myths. They tell them like they're warnings. That's where I was 4 months ago, in April, when everything changed. The spring rains had just started. The new river was swollen and angry. The weather kept shifting. Cold rain one moment, fog the next. Visibility in the deep hollows was terrible. Sometimes only 30 or 40 feet before the mist swallowed everything. It was the kind of season when people get lost. And they did. The call came in around 2 in the afternoon. A hiker named James Morrison had gone out on a trail near Glade Creek that morning and never came back. His wife waited until evening, then called the station. By the time I got the message, I already knew something was wrong. That feeling was sitting in my chest like a stone. I took Marcus Webb, one of our best search and rescue specialists, and we headed out with dogs and gear. The trail Morrison had taken was well marked, easy for someone experienced. But the afternoon fog was rolling in thick, and the sound of the creek running high made it hard to hear anything else. We traced his path for about 3 miles, and then the dogs got confused. They kept circling, whining, refusing to go deeper into the valley. That was the first sign something wasn't normal. We kept going on foot, calling his name. The hollow got narrower and darker as we descended. The rock walls rose up above us, cutting off the sky. The fog was so thick now that I couldn't see more than 20 feet in any direction, and everything was quiet except for the creek. Even our footsteps sounded muffled. Then we heard crying. Not a shout for help, something quieter, more broken. We climbed toward the sound, scrambling up loose scree and grabbing at roots. After maybe 10 minutes of climbing, we found him. James Morrison was wedged between 2 rocks in a crevasse, about 30 feet above the creek bed. He wasn't hurt bad from the fall. He had scrapes and bruises, some minor cuts, but something else was wrong with him. His clothes were soaked in sweat despite the cold. He was shaking so hard his teeth were chattering. And his eyes looked like he'd seen something that broke him. We got him out and started the climb back up. Marcus tried to ask him questions, but James wouldn't talk. He just kept looking back down into the fog like it was chasing us. I was helping him over a steep section when I saw them. His back was covered in scratches, long parallel marks running from his shoulders down to his ribs, as if something with claws had dragged him. But the scratches were too perfect, too evenly spaced. I counted them. 9 marks on one side, perfectly parallel, like something with 9 fingers had left its mark. "What happened to you?" I asked him. James looked at me and his eyes went wide. "They followed me," he whispered. "When I went into the hollow looking for the creek, they came out of the fog. Things. They looked like people, but they weren't. They were so tall and they moved wrong. They made sounds like they were trying to talk to me, but I couldn't understand the words. They kept calling my name. How did they know my name? I didn't answer because I didn't have one. We got him to the hospital in Fayetteville. The doctors examined him and found the scratches were real, but they couldn't explain their pattern. They took x-rays of his back and shoulders but found no fractures. Physically, he was going to be fine. Mentally was a different story. Over the next few days, James Morrison got worse instead of better. He started screaming at night, saying something was still calling to him. When we tried to keep him in a dark room for observation, he nearly broke the window trying to get out. He kept saying he could hear voices of people he'd known who were dead, asking him to come back to the hollow. The doctors sedated him, but he didn't improve. His mind seemed to be breaking piece by piece. I didn't tell anyone about the scratches or what I was thinking. I went back to the hollow where we found him. The rain had stopped and the fog was thinner. I brought a camera and a tape measure. In the mud near the crevasse where James was stuck, I found footprints. That's when my mouth went dry. The prints were humanoid but wrong. They looked almost like bare human feet, but longer and thinner. And when I counted the toe marks, there were 7 on one foot, 8 on the other. The stride length was wrong too. Whatever made those prints was maybe 7.5 feet tall, and the patterns weren't random. They spiraled around the area, as if something had been pacing, walking in circles, waiting. I photographed everything. My hands were shaking the whole time. That night, I called my Aunt Clara in Charleston. She was my father's sister, and she was 85 years old. I hadn't talked to her much since my father died, but I needed to know something. "Did Dad ever tell you about the things he saw in the mines?" I asked her. There was a long silence on the phone. "How do you know about that?" she finally said. "He told his coworker something. Before the day he died." Another silence. "Then, your father saw things. He never wanted to talk about them, but sometimes late at night, he'd mention it. Things that lived deeper than men should dig. Things that moved wrong. He said they were waiting for something, or waiting to become something." "What do you mean, waiting to become something?" "I don't know, Samuel. But he said the day he died, the feeling was so strong he couldn't ignore it. He said the things were calling him. I've always wondered if he went into that mine on purpose." After I hung up, I sat in the dark apartment and thought about my father walking into darkness, following a feeling he couldn't resist. The next morning, 2 more hikers went missing in the same area. This time, the response was bigger. My supervisor, Director Hayes, came out himself. He brought Dr. Evelyn Torres, our park biologist, and Marcus Webb. The 4 of us went into the hollow together, prepared for the worst. The weather was terrible. Rain came and went in cycles, and the fog was so thick that sometimes I couldn't see 3 feet in front of me. We set up ropes and moved carefully, calling the names of the missing hikers. No response came back. As we descended deeper, everything felt wrong. The forest changed. The trees grew in strange patterns, their branches twisted in ways that didn't look natural. Some of them seemed to have been deliberately bent, as if shaped by hands over years and years. The vegetation was sparse even though water was everywhere. Dead leaves covered the ground, and everything smelled like rot and something metallic, like blood left to rust. The air got colder as we went down, even though we were descending toward lower elevation where it should have been warmer. And the smell got worse, copper and decay and something else I couldn't identify. We found footprints, the same kind I'd found before. More of them now, dozens of them, all moving in patterns that suggested intelligence. Some spiraled, some ran in parallel lines. Some seemed to converge on a single spot, as if something had been waiting there. "What the hell made these?" Marcus said, staring at them. "I don't know," I said, but I was lying. I was starting to know. That's when we heard the sound. It was like voices, but not words we could understand. Like wind, but not wind. Like something breathing, but breathing with hundreds of lungs. It came from all around us at once, impossible to locate. It made my teeth ache. Dr. Torres pulled out a tape recorder and turned it on. "Recording unknown sounds," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "Possibly animal vocalizations, but pattern is unusual." Then we saw them. They emerged from the fog like memories becoming solid. Pale, almost translucent, standing about 7.5 feet tall. Their arms hung down past their hips, and their movements were jerky and strange, as if their bodies didn't quite work right. I counted 6 of them at first, standing maybe 50 feet away, just watching us. Director Hayes made a sound between a gasp and a whimper. "Stay calm," I said, though my own heart was pounding hard enough that I thought it would break my ribs. "We're going to back away slowly." "Samuel," Dr. Torres whispered. "What are they?" "I don't know," I said again. "But they're not attacking, they're just watching." For a moment, nothing happened. We stood there in the fog, and they stood there, and we watched each other. Then I heard Director Hayes make another sound. Not fear this time, but something like recognition. That's my brother, he said, pointing at one of the figures. No, it's not, I said. It is. I know his voice. He's calling me. Listen, don't you hear him? I didn't hear anything but the fog sounds. But Hayes was moving, walking toward the creatures, his hand reaching out. I grabbed his arm and pulled him back, hard enough that he fought me. We need to leave, I said, now. But my brother is not here, I said, and I meant it. Whatever was here, whatever was calling to Director Hayes with a voice that sounded like his dead brother, it wasn't actually his brother. The creatures didn't move as we backed away. They just watched with what seemed like patient hunger. Behind us, I could hear other sounds now, more of them, moving through the fog, circling us. Our radios weren't working. The compass spun uselessly. When Marcus checked the GPS, the coordinates it was giving didn't exist. We were lost, completely lost, even though I'd been to this hollow a dozen times. It was like the landscape had changed while we weren't looking. We climbed for 2 hours before we found the trail again. The whole time, we could hear them moving in the fog behind us. And the whole time, Director Hayes kept hearing his brother's voice, kept trying to turn back. Dr. Torres was pale and silent, just climbing. Marcus kept checking behind us, his hand on the pistol he carried for emergencies. I kept climbing. I kept moving us up and away. It was nearly dark by the time we pulled ourselves up onto the ridge above the hollow. We collapsed on the ground, all of us breathing hard, all of us shaking. Behind us, the fog seemed to have a boundary. It didn't rise above a certain elevation. It just sat in the deep valley, thick and alive and patient. That's when I saw them clearly. They were standing in a line across the hillside below us, stretched across the narrow valley. Not 6 of them now, maybe 20, and some of them were wearing clothes. I recognized a hiking jacket from a missing person report from 3 years ago. They're converting them, Dr. Torres said, understanding what I was understanding. Somehow they're converting humans into more of them. We need to get Hayes down the mountain, I said. But then the creatures did something I didn't expect. They spoke. It wasn't loud. It wasn't threatening. It was just voices, dozens of them, speaking in unison, but in a language I didn't understand. Except I did understand, not with my ears, but with something deeper, with that feeling my father had always talked about. The feeling that lived in my bones. They were saying, the hollows must remain empty. We guard the threshold. If humans keep coming, we will rise from the hollow and claim the high places too. Director Hayes didn't recover his sanity that night, and he never did recover it fully. He spent 3 weeks in psychiatric care, but his mind kept trying to return to the hollow. He'd escape sometimes, and we'd find him at the rim, staring down into the fog, listening for his brother's voice. Eventually, the hospital moved him to a facility farther away from the mountains. I visited him once. He looked at me like I was a ghost, and he kept asking me when the creatures would let him go home. They're patient, he said to me. That's what I understand now. They're so patient, and they're so lonely. They want us to understand that. That's why they changed some of us, showed some of us what they were waiting for. They're gathering. They're preparing. Preparing for what? I asked. He just smiled sadly. For when the mountains call too loud to ignore. James Morrison was never the same either. He understood their language somehow, whatever it was that the creatures spoke. The hospital staff said he would sometimes whisper things at night, and the words weren't English. When they asked him what he was saying, he said he was answering, that the creatures were still calling to him from the hollows, and he was answering that he'd heard them, that he understood. A month after the hollow, I went to the National Archives office in Charleston. I was looking for something specific, records from the mining operations in the area, going back to the 1920s. It took me 3 days, but I found them. There were official mining reports, marked with government seals. Most of them were about coal production and worker counts. But some of them had sections that were redacted, whole paragraphs blacked out with pen. Except I found a few pages where the redaction wasn't complete. Enough words survived for me to read fragments. Creatures observed at depths exceeding 200 feet. Attempt at communication resulted in loss of 2 workers. Recommend immediate cessation of mining in hollow designated as. Incident reports suggest creatures adapt rapidly to human presence. There were others. Different mines, different dates, the same pattern. The creatures had been here for a long time, and humans going deep had been contacting them for at least 100 years. I started making calls. I called other park rangers in Appalachia. Rangers I knew, rangers I'd trained with. I asked them carefully, indirectly, whether they'd had experiences with unusual phenomena in the deep places. One by one, they admitted that they had. One by one, they told me about their own private no-access zones, places they kept people away from, places where things weren't right. A ranger in Kentucky told me about figures that walked at night in certain hollows. A ranger in Virginia told me about hikers who went into the mountains and came back wrong. Still human enough to walk and talk, but not right. Not anymore. They all had the same understanding I was coming to. Something ancient lived in the deep places. Something that had been here longer than anyone. And humans were learning to coexist with it, one dead hiker at a time. When Director Hayes finally died, 6 months later, from what the doctors called a stress-induced cardiac event, I wasn't surprised. I was just sad. He'd gotten a glimpse of another world, and the knowing had killed him. That was the price of understanding. I filed my official report with the Park Service. I called it Dangerous Terrain with Unusual Geological and Psychological Effects. I recommended that the specific hollows be marked off-limits permanently. I cited isolation, weather hazards, and difficult rescue conditions. Nobody questioned it. They approved the restrictions, but I kept patrolling the rims. Every month, on the new moon, I'd hike to the edge of the deep hollows and watch the fog rise. And sometimes I'd hear them calling. Sometimes I'd hear Director Hayes, or James Morrison, or the other hikers, speaking in that language that I somehow understood. They weren't calling to me. Not yet. But they were waiting. They were patient. Just like my father said, it's been 3 months since the evacuation from the hollow. I'm still a ranger. I still do my job. I still respond to calls and rescue hikers and teach people how to be safe in this landscape. But everything is different now because I understand something I wish I didn't. The mountains aren't empty. They never were. The hollows aren't just valleys. They're boundaries between worlds. And the creatures that live in the deep places aren't evil or good. They just are. They've been here longer than humans, older than any nation or language we speak, and they're adapting to us. I've discovered that the converted hikers, the ones the creatures took and remade, they're still conscious. They're in there somewhere, aware of what they've become, and they're still trying to communicate. James Morrison is still in the hospital, and sometimes he whispers things to the night staff. Warnings, I think, or maybe instructions. He keeps saying, "It doesn't hurt. It's not what you'd think. It's like coming home." I don't know what that means yet. The other rangers in Appalachia and I have started a quiet network. We share information about hollow locations, about patterns of disappearances, about the spread of the creature's territory. We're trying to understand what they want, what they're building toward. Because we know it's not just about feeding. It's not random predation. It's organized, it's intelligent, and it's expanding. There are hollows now in eastern Kentucky, eastern Tennessee, and western Virginia where the same things are reported. The creatures are slow, but they're methodical. They're taking people one at a time, converting them, using them to expand their territory. In 50 years, there might be dozens of hollows claimed by them. In 100 years, maybe they'll claim the mountains themselves. But that's not my problem to solve. I can't solve it. All I can do is what I've always done: protect people. I keep the hikers out of the deepest places. I maintain the restricted zones. I listen to the mountains and trust the feeling in my bones when it tells me something is wrong. And sometimes, on quiet nights in my apartment, I get that feeling again. That same pressure my father felt. The sense that something deep is calling. Something that's been patient for a very long time, waiting for people like us who can feel it, who can almost understand. I don't go into the hollows anymore. I'm not brave enough for that. But I'm waiting too now. Waiting to understand what the creatures want, what they're really preparing for, what the mountains are calling us toward. The hollows are not empty. They never will be. And neither am I. My name is Margaret Shaw, and I've been a park ranger for 22 years. I'm 59 years old now, and I know the Cumberland Mountains like most people know their own homes. I can walk these trails in the dark. I know which plants are safe to touch and which ones will burn your skin. I know where the water runs clean and where it tastes like rust. I know these mountains because I've made it my job to know them, and also because I've been looking for something in them most of my life. I wasn't always a ranger. I grew up in eastern Kentucky in a house that didn't have much money but had plenty of music. My mother, Annie Shaw, was a folk singer and storyteller. She could sing the old Appalachian ballads so beautifully that people would stop talking just to listen. She knew all the old stories too. The ghost tales, the warnings, the legends that grandmothers told to keep children in line. When I was young, I thought it was all just stories. Pretty stories, but not real. My father was never really in the picture. My mother never talked about him much. And we didn't ask. That was just how things were in our family. I got my education. I worked hard. I even went to college and a doctorate in Appalachian studies. I became an expert on the history of these mountains. The Native Americans who lived here, the early settlers, the way cultures clashed and mixed. I could tell you about the Shawnee and the Cherokee and the colonists who came through Cumberland Pass looking for new land. I could explain the archaeology, the historical records, the academic research. I was a scientist. I didn't believe in ghost stories, not really. Then I became a park ranger, and I dedicated my career to protecting the historical sites and cultural places in these mountains. I've always worked in the Cumberland region, mostly between Daniel Boone National Forest and the Pinnacle area. It's beautiful country, steep green mountains, narrow valleys, caves that go down so far you can't see the bottom, wild, lonely places where you can go hours without seeing another person. The real reason I became a ranger was because my mother disappeared in these mountains when I was 16 years old. It was September 1972. She said she was going for a walk in Cumberland Pass. She liked to go there to listen to the sounds, she said. Something about the way the mountains echoed made her feel connected to something old and true. I thought she was just being poetic. That was my mother's way. She didn't come back that night. She didn't come back the next day either. They searched for her. Dogs, volunteers, police. Nothing. They found her shoes near one of the cave entrances, but no body, no blood, no signs of what happened. It was like the mountains just opened up and swallowed her whole. After a few weeks, people stopped looking. She was just gone. I kept her final journal. I've kept it for 43 years. I've read those last entries 1,000 times. Her final words were about the singing in Cumberland Pass, about how beautiful it was, about how it called to something deep inside her, about how she couldn't resist it anymore. I thought maybe if I became a ranger and spent enough time in these mountains, I would figure out what happened to her. Maybe I would find some kind of closure, or at least, I would keep what happened to her from happening to someone else. I never found the closure. But I did learn something about myself. I inherited my mother's ear for music. I can hear things most people miss, tiny differences in pitch and tone, patterns in sound that others don't notice. It made me good job. It helped me understand the environmental sounds of the mountains, the calls of animals, the way wind moves through canyons. I thought it was just a useful skill. I didn't know it would be the thing that changed everything. It was late September 1996, 24 years after my mother disappeared. The weather was turning cool, the leaves just starting to change. I was at my office going through paperwork when I got a phone call that would pull me back into Cumberland Pass in a way I wasn't prepared for. A man named Dr. Aaron Whitfield was missing. He was a musicologist and researcher from the University of Kentucky. He'd been studying the acoustic properties of Cumberland Pass, the way sound behaves in the narrow valleys and caves. Legitimate scientific research. He was supposed to be back in civilization 3 days ago. He never showed up. Nobody at the park thought it was particularly strange at the time. People get lost in the mountains sometimes. They underestimate the terrain or the weather. Usually they turn up safe. Sometimes they don't. But something about this case made me feel cold in a way I couldn't explain. My supervisor asked me to lead the search since I knew the region better than anyone. I said yes immediately. I told myself it was because I was the most qualified. But deep down, I knew it was because this was my chance. Maybe this time I would find answers. I packed my gear and headed into Cumberland Pass at first light, deliberately avoiding going in at night. Even after 43 years, I wasn't quite brave enough for that. The Cumberland Pass cuts between two sections of the Cumberland Mountains like a knife wound. It's narrow and steep, with rocky ground and dense forest on both sides. In September, the morning fog doesn't clear easily. It hangs in the valley like the mountains are holding their breath. That's what it felt like when I hiked up at dawn. Like the mountains were waiting for something, Doctor. Whitfield's camp was about 3 miles into the pass, near Laurel Fork Gorge. I found it exactly where his last radio transmission said it would be. And that's where the strange part started. The camp was perfect, too perfect. His tent was set up neatly. His equipment was organized. His supplies were stacked in a way that showed careful planning. There were no signs of struggle or panic. There was no body, no blood, no indication that anything violent had happened here. But Dr. Whitfield was gone. The strangest part was his research materials. He had notebooks filled with acoustic measurements and recordings. His laptop was still here, powered down but undamaged. And there were cassette tapes scattered across a folding table, dozens of them, each labeled with dates and times. I picked up one of the notebooks. The handwriting got stranger as the pages went on. His early notes were scientific, measurements, frequencies, analysis of how sound bounced off rocks and cave walls. But his last entries were different. The handwriting got bigger and sloppier, like he was writing faster, like he couldn't keep up with his own thoughts. The final entry read, "The sounds aren't random, they're not just echo. They're organized, they follow patterns, they're music. And it's coming from something intentional. Something is composing the sounds." Under that, he'd written one more line, underlined 3 times. "My God, it's alive." I picked up one of the cassette tapes with shaking hands. Using the battery-powered tape player he'd left in the tent, I listened. What I heard didn't sound like anything I'd ever experienced. It was music, but not like any music I knew. It had layers, complex harmonies that seemed to come from no single instrument. Sometimes it sounded almost like a human voice, but not quite. Sometimes it sounded like wind moving through a canyon, but too organized, too intentional. The tones were beautiful, genuinely hauntingly beautiful. But there was something underneath the beauty that made my skin crawl. And underneath the music, if you listened carefully, you could hear something else. Breathing. Not human breathing, but something big and steady and alive. My mother's ear picked up on details that a normal person might miss. I could hear how the music had structure and meaning. It wasn't random nature sounds. It was communication. Something was trying to say something with that music. I found Whitfield's phone on the table. It was fully charged. I was about to call in my discovery when the phone rang in my hands. I nearly dropped it. The caller ID said, "Whitfield, Aaron," I answered. "Hello?" My voice shook. There was a pause. Then a voice spoke, kind of like Dr. Whitfield's voice, but wrong, layered. Like multiple voices speaking at the exact same time, so perfectly synchronized that it sounded like one voice trying to be 2. "Ranger Shaw," the voice said. "I hadn't told anyone my name. I'm sorry for the concern. I've found the source. I'm staying longer to document it fully. Tell them not to worry." "Dr. Whitfield?" I said. "Where are you? Are you hurt?" "I'm more aware than I've ever been," the voice said, more complete. "The singing, it's not just sound, Ranger Shaw. It's truth, it's understanding, it's everything humans have been missing." The line went dead. I reported finding the camp immediately. I filed it as a missing person case with potential voluntary disappearance. Maybe he'd gotten lost. Maybe he'd decided to go deeper into the wilderness to continue his research. My superiors decided to send a larger team to search, but the season was getting late and resources were limited. That night, I drove back to my small house on the edge of the national forest. I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing Whitfield's layered voice in my head. I kept thinking about my mother's last journal entry. I made a decision that probably wasn't smart. The next morning, I packed extra supplies and headed back into Cumberland Pass. I told myself it was for the official search, but really, I was going to spend the night there. I was going to listen for the singing. I set up a temporary camp about a quarter mile from where Whitfield's tent was still sitting. I brought recording equipment and my personal audio player. As the sun got lower, the temperature dropped. The fog rolled in thicker. The forest around me got quieter. And then, right around dusk, it started. The sound came from deep in the pass, from the cave system that Whitfield's last notes had pointed toward. It started as something you felt more than heard, a vibration in the ground, the air. Then it rose into something audible. It was the most beautiful thing I've ever heard. I can't describe it in words. Music is made of notes, and this was made of something deeper. Something that spoke directly to the part of your brain that understands feeling instead of language. It was sad and joyful at the same time. It was ancient and alive. It was calling to something inside me that recognized it, that wanted to answer it. I understood why my mother hadn't come back. I understood why Whitfield had chosen to stay. I was so caught up in listening that I almost didn't notice the sun was gone. It was almost dark. The temperature had dropped another 10 degrees, and the singing had gotten louder, closer, like whatever was making those sounds was moving in my direction. That's when the fear kicked in. It broke the spell. I packed my things in the dark, moving fast. As I hiked back toward the main trail, I could hear the singing following me. Not moving through the physical landscape, it was something else. It was echoing off the rocks in ways that sounded wrong, in ways that didn't follow the normal rules of how sound moves. I ran the last mile. When I got back to my ranger station, I was shaking. Not from cold, from knowing something I couldn't explain, couldn't prove, couldn't tell anyone about. I should have reported it. I should have called for help. Instead, I called Dr. Helena Cross at the University of Kentucky. She was an acoustic specialist, and she owed me a favor from an earlier historical research project. I told her I had an unusual sound phenomenon in Cumberland Pass that I needed her to analyze. I didn't tell her the full truth. She agreed to come out the next week. I also called in my old friend Joseph Pike, who'd worked as a ranger in this region for 15 years. He knew the mountains nearly as well as I did. I told him I needed backup for an investigation. He agreed to help. Neither of them knew what they were walking into, Doctor. Helena Cross arrived on a gray Wednesday morning with her equipment. She was professional and skeptical. Exactly what I needed. She brought microphones, acoustic analyzers, and recording devices way more sophisticated than what Whitfield had used. Joseph Pike met us at the ranger station with fresh supplies and maps marked with the areas where I'd heard the most intense singing. "So, you think there's something weird with the sound in the pass?" Joseph asked as we organized the gear. He was in his 50s, weathered and practical. He wasn't the type to believe in ghost stories. I liked that about him. "I know there's something unusual," I said carefully. "I want to understand it." Dr. Cross set up her equipment near Whitfield's old camp. It took most of the day to get everything working and calibrated. As the sun got lower, she started analyzing the ambient sounds of the pass. Her face changed as she looked at the data. "Margaret," she said slowly, "what am I looking at?" "I'm not sure," I said, though I was pretty sure. "What does the data show? These frequencies shouldn't be possible," she said. "The sound waves are too organized, too consistent. They're not decaying the way sound naturally decays over distance. It's like something is regenerating them, sustaining them." "Can you record them?" I asked. She set up the recording equipment. As the light faded, the singing started. Dr. Cross's face went pale as she listened to it coming through her headphones. She looked at me, then at Joseph, then back at me. "That's not a natural phenomenon," she whispered. Joseph had his hands over his ears. "I don't like this," he said. "This doesn't feel right. Margaret, what is this?" "I don't know," I said, "but I need to understand it." That night, we set up camp in the pass. None of us wanted to be there as it got fully dark, but we couldn't leave. We needed to document what was happening. As the singing got stronger, Dr. Cross's hands shook as she adjusted her equipment. The music had patterns. Over several hours of recording and analyzing, Dr. Cross identified them. There were themes, musical ideas that repeated and changed. There were variations, like the same melody played in different ways. This wasn't random sound. This was composition. This was language. "Something is making this intentionally," Dr. Cross said. "Something is trying to communicate." Around midnight, we heard a human voice. It was calling out, not using words but making the same tones as the singing. At first, I thought it might be Whitfield. We moved toward the sound, following it deeper into the pass toward the cave system. We found him at the entrance to the largest cave. He was standing perfectly still, his face turned toward the darkness. When he heard us, he turned. His eyes caught the light from our flashlights, and they reflected it wrong, like an animal's eyes, like his pupils had gotten too large. "Dr. Whitfield?" Joseph said carefully. Whitfield smiled, but the smile didn't look quite right on his face. "Ranger Pike. And Ranger Shaw, I'm glad you came back. You need to hear this. You need to understand." His voice was layered again, like multiple Whitfields speaking in perfect harmony. "What happened to you?" Dr. Cross asked. She was holding her recording equipment like it might protect her. "I'm becoming something more," Whitfield said. "The singing, it's not harmful. It's an invitation. Something very old lives here, in these caves. Something that has been trying to reach humans for thousands of years. It speaks in music because that's the only language that can bridge the gap between its way of thinking and ours. Come with us," I said. "We can get you help." "I don't need help," Whitfield said. "I need you to understand. The singing is changing me, yes, but not hurting me. It's rewriting me. My body, my mind, my consciousness. Everything is aligning with the singing's frequency. Soon I'll be able to perceive reality the way it does. I'll understand things you can't imagine." He turned back toward the cave. The singing got louder. Whitfield began humming along with it, his voice joining the layered tones, becoming part of the music, Doctor. Cross started humming too. "Helena, stop," I said, but she couldn't. The melodies were in her head now, and her body wouldn't obey her mind's commands. She kept humming, even as she tried to stop, even as fear filled her eyes. Joseph was covering his ears, pressing hard, but the sound was coming from everywhere. From the ground, the air, the rocks. It wasn't just reaching his ears anymore. It was vibrating through his whole body. And I was changing too. I could feel the music working on me, trying to align me with its frequency. It was beautiful and terrible. It promised understanding, peace, the answer to every question I'd ever had. All I had to do was stop resisting. All I had to do was let the singing change me. Then I remembered my mother's journal. She'd written that she couldn't resist anymore. She'd written about the singing in a way that sounded beautiful, but also desperate, like she'd lost the ability to choose. And she'd disappeared. 43 years, and I'd never known what happened to her. I forced myself to look away from Whitfield. I grabbed Dr. Cross's hand. "Run," I said. We ran back toward the camp. Joseph was already moving, his big frame crashing through the forest. The singing followed us, echoing through the pass in impossible ways, traveling through the ground and air faster than we were running. We made it back to camp and started packing. My hands shook as I stuffed equipment into bags. Dr. Cross was still humming, unable to stop. Joseph's face was white, and his hands were bleeding where he'd pressed them too hard against his ears. "We have to go," I said. "Now." We hiked out of Cumberland Pass in the dark. I've hiked these trails my whole career, but I've never moved through them so fast or so scared. Behind us, the singing got quieter, but not because we were getting away from it. It was getting quieter because it was satisfied. It had made contact. It had planted something in us. We didn't talk much on the drive back. Dr. Cross sat in the back seat, humming in a way she couldn't control. Joseph stared out the window, his hearing aids pulled out and sitting useless in his lap. He would tell me later that he could hear the singing even better without them, that it was reaching him through the ground, through the air, through something deeper than sound. 3 days later, Dr. Cross went back to the university, and she was never quite the same. She started a research project on acoustic consciousness, the theory that sound frequencies could affect human consciousness at a fundamental level. She published papers. She got grants. But the work consumed her. She was trying to understand the singing from the inside, as if she could study her own transformation and control it. Joseph took medical leave from the park. He settled in a small cabin on the edge of the forest where he could listen to the singing without having to hide it anymore. He wouldn't see visitors. He spent his days and nights tuning himself to the frequencies, humming along with the distant music. And I went back to my house and pulled out my mother's journals. I'd read them before, but I'd never really let myself understand what they meant. This time, I read them with the knowledge of what the singing could do, and I found something I'd missed before. A final entry, written on the night she disappeared, in handwriting so shaky it was almost illegible. It's singing my name, not with words, but with frequencies that only I can hear, that are shaped by who I am, what I understand. It knows me. It's been waiting for me. All those stories I told Margaret about the mountains speaking. I was right. The mountains do speak. The earth speaks. And it wants me to listen. And then, on the last page, I choose to go. Not because I'm trapped, but because I finally understand what I've been missing my whole life. The singing is the truth. Everything else is just noise. I cried reading that. For the first time in 43 years, I really let myself cry. That night, I made a decision. I was going to go back into Cumberland Pass. I was going to face whatever was in those caves. And I was going to get answers, not just about my mother, but about what this thing was, what it wanted, and whether it could be stopped. The next morning, I packed my gear. But instead of going alone, I called Dr. Cross and told her to meet me at the pass. I needed her expertise. And I called Joseph. When they arrived, they looked like different people. Dr. Cross's eyes had that same reflective quality that Whitfield's had developed. Joseph had hearing aids in both ears now, but I could see him humming softly, not even aware he was doing it. "You're both becoming like Whitfield," I said. "Yes," Dr. Cross said simply. "It's happening slowly, but it's happening. I can feel parts of my thinking changing, aligning with something larger. It doesn't hurt. It just feels inevitable." "I want to understand," Joseph said. "I want to know what I'm changing into." "Then we go in," I said, "all the way, to the source." We hiked deep into the pass, past Whitfield's camp, past the cave entrance where we'd found him. The singing got louder as we went deeper. The autumn afternoon was turning gray, clouds moving in fast. By the time we reached the main cave system, it felt like twilight, even though it was only 3 in the afternoon. The cave mouth was huge, a dark opening big enough to fit a car through. The singing was coming from inside, echoing out in waves that we could feel in our bones. Dr. Cross started walking toward it immediately, drawn like something had a string attached to her. I grabbed her arm. "Wait, we do this together." We each carried flashlights. As we entered the cave, the darkness was total except for our small lights. The rock walls were smooth in some places, jagged in others, and the singing got louder the deeper we went. It was all around us, so loud our ears rang, for what felt like hours. The cave system went down and down, and then, finally, the cave opened up into something enormous. Our flashlights hit the walls and disappeared into darkness. This wasn't a cave anymore. It was a cavern, maybe hundreds of feet across, and the floor. The floor was moving, not like water or liquid, like something solid but alive, vibrating with the frequency of the singing. And it was glowing. Not bright, but with a soft luminescence that came from within. like bioluminescent organisms but bigger, more organized. And rising from the center of that glowing floor was a shape. I don't have good words for what I saw. It was humanoid but made of something between matter and energy. It was maybe 15 feet tall, constantly shifting as the singing moved through it. Its structure was made of visible sound waves, light bending around frequencies, forming a rough human shape that was never quite solid. When it spoke, the entire cavern resonated. It wasn't using words, it was pure music, but complex and layered in a way that my mind could interpret meaning from. It was trying to tell me something, and because of my mother's training, because of my own sensitivity to music and frequency, I could almost understand. The singing showed me images, very old images. This being had been here since before the mountains were mountains, since before the continents shifted into their current shape. It was made of organized sound, of frequencies that created reality instead of just reflecting it. It had been alone for longer than humans had language. The singing told me about my mother. How she'd come here, how she'd listened deeply, how she'd begun to understand, how the process of understanding meant changing, becoming something new, how she'd chosen to let that happen. The singing told me that it wasn't trying to hurt anyone. It was trying to connect. It was lonely, in a way that a human can barely comprehend. It had been trying to reach out for millennia, leaving traces in the stories humans told, in the music humans created, in the feeling people got when they heard ancient songs. And it told me that it could remake humans in its image. It could align their frequencies with its own. It could make them understand. It could make them part of something bigger and older and more real than individual human consciousness. All they had to do was stop resisting. Dr. Cross was already walking toward the creature. So was Joseph. They were humming in perfect harmony with the singing, and their bodies were starting to glow, starting to show the same translucent quality that the creature had. I stood at the edge of that cavern and faced the biggest decision of my life. I could let the singing change me. I could become part of it. I could finally understand what my mother had understood. I could merge with something ancient and beautiful and true. Or I could choose to stay human, incomplete, limited, but myself. My mother had made her choice. I had to make mine. I opened my mouth and began to sing. Not the creature's song, but the ballads my mother had taught me. Old Appalachian songs about love and loss and people who chose their own paths. My voice shook at first, but it got stronger. The creature responded. Its singing changed. It didn't attack me or try to force me. Instead, it listened. For the first time, it was listening to something other than itself. And in that moment, I understood. The creature wasn't evil. It was just so different from humans that its gift, the gift of understanding and transformation, could only be received by losing your humanity. I could offer it something else. I sang louder. And I spoke to it in the language of metaphor and meaning, in the way my mother had taught me to speak to the mountains. I told it that I honored what it was. I told it that its loneliness was real and it mattered. I told it that I couldn't become what it needed me to become, but I could protect it. I could keep it safe, and I promised that I would tell its story. Not as a monster or a legend, but as a truth. An ancient being made of sound, trying to reach across an impossible distance to connect. The singing changed. It became quieter, sadder, but also like it was accepting something. The creature began to retreat back into the deepest parts of the cavern, drawing back into itself. Dr. Cross and Joseph stopped walking. They turned to look at me, still humming, still glowing, but stable now. Balance between what they were and what they were becoming. "Come on," I said. We climbed back out of the cavern, back through the cave system, back into the twilight of Cumberland Pass. Behind us, the singing got quieter, but it never fully stopped. It just pulled back deeper, waiting, listening, remembering. The official report said that Dr. Aaron Whitfield had made a choice to stay in the remote region for further research. The park confirmed his safety and his desire to continue his work independently. To outsiders, he simply became another eccentric researcher who preferred wilderness to civilization. I closed Cumberland Pass to public access. The official reason was geological instability, structural concerns with the cave systems. The real reason was protection. That creature had been trying to reach humans for thousands of years. I wasn't going to help it succeed by letting tourists walk right into its cavern. Dr. Cross returned to the university, and her transformation stabilized. She still hums the creature's melodies, and people who know her say that music has become part of how she thinks. But she's still herself. She's just more than she was. She's started teaching classes on consciousness and sound that are unlike anything the university has offered before. Her students say her lectures change the way they perceive reality. Joseph Pike never came back to work. He lives in that cabin on the forest edge, and he's become something like a guardian of the pass. Hikers occasionally report seeing him standing at the boundary, and he turns them back before they can go too deep. Some people say he can hear things in the forest that no one else can. Some people say he's changed into something that's no longer quite human. As for me, I'm still the ranger for this region. I keep the Cumberland Pass closed. I maintain Whitfield's camp as a private research area, and every evening at dusk, I stand at the edge of the pass and listen. The singing is still there. It's quieter now, more controlled, like it's respecting the agreement we made. Sometimes I hear it harmonizing with Joseph's humming from his cabin, and with Dr. Cross's voice as she hums in her office at the university. Miles away, it's like the creature has stretched itself across the entire region, connecting all of us. I never found my mother. I never will. But I've made peace with that. She chose something bigger than herself, and there's a kind of beauty in that choice, even if it meant I lost her. And sometimes, when the wind is right and the evening light is just a certain shade of gold, I swear I can hear my mother's voice in the singing. Not lost, just transformed, just part of something that has been waiting since before time had a name. The singing dark of Cumberland Pass is still there. It's still trying to reach people. It's still lonely, still calling, still hoping that someone might understand. Most people will never hear it. The mountains are full of sounds, and most humans just hear noise. But if you have the right kind of ears, if you inherited them from someone who listened too deeply, you might hear it too. And if you do, I hope you choose better than my mother did. I hope you choose yourself. But I won't judge you if you don't. My name is Calvin Roberts, and I've spent the last 16 years as a park ranger in the Black Mountains of North Carolina. I'm 53 years old now, which means I've spent more than a third of my life walking these mountains, knowing their trails better than I know my own home. People ask me sometimes why I chose this work. They picture rangers as the type who take pictures with tourists and point out scenic overlooks. But I've always worked wildlife management and predator control. That means understanding what hunts, how it thinks, and sometimes how to stop it. My father was a coal miner, so was my grandfather. So were 3 of my uncles. That's what you did in eastern Kentucky, in the town where I grew up. You went underground. You dug coal. You came back up, or sometimes you didn't. My brother Tommy didn't come back up. Not completely. There was an accident in the mine when I was 33 years old. A cave-in, they said. They found parts of him, not all of him. I never went into the mines. My mother made me promise when I was young, and I kept that promise. But I've always wondered about the dark places under mountains. I became a ranger specifically to understand the underground, to understand what lives beneath the earth. The Black Mountains are beautiful and dangerous. The peaks rise up sharp and serious, covered in old-growth forest. The valleys between them are deep and full of shadow. In July, the month this story starts, the heat is intense. Daytime temperatures push toward 90 degrees, but the nights cool down to the mid-60s. The air is thick with humidity. Everything smells like wet leaves and rich soil and growing things. These mountains are isolated. Some trails are only accessible to experienced hikers. There's no cell service in most areas. If you get hurt in the deep parts of the mountains, rescue takes 4 to 6 hours. That's a long time to be hurt and alone. Most people don't know much about Appalachian folklore. They hear about ghost stories maybe, or moonshine. But there's something else in these mountains, something older. The Cherokee who lived here before my ancestors came spoke about creatures that hunt under the mountain. Old-time Appalachian folk tales warn about things that drag on, creatures that pull you down into the earth. My grandfather used to tell stories about miners who disappeared, about sounds in the tunnels that didn't match any animal anyone had ever documented. I'd always thought these were just stories, the kind of thing people told to scare children or to explain accidents they didn't understand. I was wrong. July 15th was a Tuesday when the call came in. An 8-person hiking group was overdue. They'd been attempting to summit Black Dome, one of the peaks. Experienced hikers, all of them. Good equipment. They should have checked in by evening. They didn't. We found their camp by noon the next day. The tents were still standing. The fire pit was there. The cooking equipment untouched. This wasn't a group that got lost and wandered away. This was a camp that something had come into the middle of. The first thing I noticed was the drag marks. They started near the center of the camp by the fire and led away toward a steep slope. The marks were deep and obvious. Something heavy had been pulled across the ground with significant force. But these weren't the drag marks of someone being pulled by the feet or under the arms. These were different. The marks were too wide apart. The depth was inconsistent. as if something massive and powerful was dragging something else, and dragging it deliberately. "Could be a bear," said Marcus, one of the rangers working with me. "Bear drags a body sometimes." I shook my head. "I've seen bear kills. I've seen how bears move prey. This was something else." The drag marks led to a sinkhole. It wasn't marked on any of our maps. The hole dropped nearly 40 feet straight down, opening into darkness. I'd never seen this spot before, and I know these mountains like I know my own face. We found the first survivor at the bottom. His name was David Chen. He was conscious, barely. His legs were badly scraped and one was broken. His arms were covered in scratches, not the small scratches of thorns or brush, but deep gouges. The scratches were too wide apart, too precise, claw marks, and the claws that made them had to be as big as my fingers. It came into the camp, David said through his pain. His voice was shaking. At night, I couldn't see it clearly, too dark. But it was huge, massive. It just started grabbing people, dragging them. Most of us ran. But Danny, he stopped, breathing hard. Danny ran the wrong way, ran toward the hole, thinking it was a way out of the camp, I think. The thing was faster. It dragged him. I saw the outline, just the shape of it against the dark, dragging him under the mountain. We rappelled down into the sinkhole with lights and equipment. The bottom opened into a tunnel system. The tunnel was wide, maybe 12 feet across, and it sloped downward into the earth. The air changed the moment we entered. It became colder. There was a smell, an animal smell, mixed with something metallic. Copper, blood. Our flashlights didn't work quite right down there. The beams seemed dimmer, as if the darkness was pushing back against the light. The beam distance was shorter than it should have been. We could only see maybe 20 feet ahead clearly. The tunnel showed signs of recent large animal movement. Huge claw marks scraped the walls. There was dark, coarse hair caught on rocks. Dried blood, a lot of it, leading deeper. And then we heard the sounds, not close. From deeper in the tunnel system, the sound of something massive moving. A dragging sound. And something else, a low, rumbling vocalization. Not quite a roar, not quite a growl. Something that didn't match any animal any of us had ever heard. Marcus's hand was shaking on his rifle. "Calvin, we need to move faster." But I was already noticing something else. A pattern in the tunnel. Recent remains, human remains, arranged along the tunnel floor. Not scattered like something feeding, arranged. In a line, like they were being displayed, like this was intentional. I felt my stomach tighten. This wasn't just predatory behavior. This was something with intelligence. Something that hunted humans deliberately. We brought in specialists, cave experts, animal behaviorists. Within 2 days, we had a small camp set up near the sinkhole, and we began exploring the tunnel system more systematically. The remains we found told a story that got worse the deeper we went. Forensic analysis showed that the victims were killed quickly. Massive trauma. Something with enormous strength. But they were dragged post-mortem, meaning they were killed somewhere else in the tunnel system, then brought to these display areas. The remains we'd found were older. Some weeks old, some months. But there were fresh remains too. Less than a week old, the creature was actively hunting. Based on claw marks and the width of the drag patterns, we estimated the creature was massive. Probably 8 to 10 feet tall when standing upright. The claws were 4 to 6 inches long. The strength required to drag a 200-pound human across rough stone like it weighed nothing. That was beyond any normal animal. By the 3rd day of exploration, we'd found evidence of dozens of kills, all arranged in specific patterns throughout multiple chambers in the tunnel network. Some of the remains were animal, deer, elk, black bears. Most were human. Looking at the remains, trying to estimate ages and dates of death, my hands started shaking. I found records of missing hikers going back more than 20 years. Not all missing persons. Just the ones who went into the mountains and never came out. I'd worked here for 16 years, and I'd thought these were random disappearances. Accidents, people who got lost or fell. I was thinking about my brother when I found it. It was a wallet, brown leather worn inside, a driver's license. Tommy Roberts, age 33. The picture was from 12 years before his supposed mining accident. The accident that had happened, supposedly, in a coal mine 30 miles from here. An accident that left no complete body. My hands went numb. The specialist team was moving carefully through another chamber, maybe 50 feet away. I don't think anyone saw me slip the wallet into my pocket. That night, we were back in the tunnels, going deeper than we'd gone before. The air was getting colder. The smell of the creature was stronger. The darkness seemed heavier, like it was pushing down on us, trying to keep us out or keep something in. We heard it before we saw it. The sound of massive movement. Something large moving with deliberate speed through the tunnel ahead of us. The dragging sound of something being moved. Then, the vocalizations again, those low, rumbling sounds that didn't fit into any category of known animal. Our flashlights caught something, a shape, huge, dark, moving on two legs, not four. The arms were massive, hanging long at its sides. The claws at the ends of those arms caught the light for just a second. 6-inch curved claws, like nothing alive should have. The head was turned toward us, and I could see the shape of it, roughly humanoid but fundamentally wrong. The jaw was too large, jutting forward. The eyes were placed too far apart. The expression, I'm not sure a human can truly understand the expression on its face, but it spoke of predatory intelligence, of something that hunted deliberately, with strategy and purpose. It took a step toward us. Go, I said now. Move. We didn't run. We walked quickly, keeping our flashlight beams on the tunnel floor so we wouldn't trip, but moving with purpose. Behind us, the sounds continued. The creature didn't chase. It just stood there, watching us leave. When we reached the sinkhole and climbed out, the sun was setting. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. The 3 other missing hikers were found that night, stumbling out of the forest near the camp. They were disoriented, exhausted, their clothes torn. They reported being pursued by something large, something that seemed to be herding them away from the mountain rather than chasing them to kill them. The creature had let them live. That was the moment I understood. The creature didn't kill randomly. It selected its prey. It let some go. It deliberately dragged others to its underground chambers. This wasn't animal behavior. This was strategy. This was intelligence. And it knew about my brother. Somehow, across 20 years, it had kept his wallet. It had arranged his remains with the others. It had remembered him. I made a decision that night, a decision that maybe was crazy. I was going back down, alone, at night when the creature was most active. The other rangers and specialists thought I was losing my mind. My supervisor ordered me not to go, but I was the senior ranger. I knew the rules about that. I could operate independently in wildlife management emergencies. I made it official. A solo predator investigation. I rappelled down into the sinkhole at 11 p.m. I brought minimal equipment, a flashlight, a knife, my brother's wallet. I made my way through the tunnel system, not trying to hide, not trying to be quiet. I walked toward the sounds, toward the smell, deeper into the mountain than I'd gone before. The tunnel opened into a massive chamber, maybe 100 feet across. The ceiling lost in darkness above, and in the middle of that chamber there was a lair, bones scattered around it, debris. Evidence of a creature that had been living here for years, maybe decades. The creature was waiting for me. It stepped out of the shadows at the far end of the chamber. In the beam of my flashlight, I could see it fully. It was everything we'd estimated, but seeing it in person was different. Seeing that it was real was different. 9 feet tall, maybe 10, covered in dark fur. The musculature was dense and powerful. The face was that wrong blend of humanoid and predatory that I'll probably see in my nightmares for the rest of my life. It looked at me. I held up my brother's wallet. I didn't plan to speak. What language would a creature like this understand? But I found myself talking anyway. Not saying anything profound, just saying my brother's name. Saying that I'd come to understand. Saying that I knew what had happened to him. The creature took a slow step toward me. I didn't back away. It reached out one of those massive clawed hands. I genuinely believed that this was how I was going to die. That I'd come down here to find my brother's killers and become another body to add to the collection. But the creature's hand was gentle, impossibly gentle. It took the wallet from my hands with those 6-inch claws, handling it carefully, like something precious. It turned the wallet over in its hands, looking at it. Then it placed the wallet on the stone floor in front of me. You remember him, I said. It wasn't a question. The creature made a low sound. Not aggressive, not threatening. Something else. The closest thing I can compare it to is acknowledgement. Like two beings who had lost something, meeting in the dark, recognizing that loss. I understood then. My brother had been human prey to this creature, yes. But the creature had also been a being in this mountain, living by its rules, hunting what it hunted. And when it had killed my brother, it had arranged him with the others, in a way that suggested respect, not desecration. I'm going to seal this place, I told the creature. I'm going to mark the sinkhole, make it so no one comes down here, no one bothers you. But in exchange, you stop hunting humans. The ones that respect the mountain, that don't come down here, they get to live. The creature made another low sound. Then it turned and walked deeper into its chamber, disappearing into the darkness. I picked up my brother's wallet and climbed back toward the surface. The official report said the deaths were caused by a large predatory bear, that the sinkhole had triggered a collapse that killed some hikers and caused others to be injured. I recommended permanently sealing the sinkhole and closing that area of the mountain to the public. My supervisor approved it. Within a week, we had the sinkhole sealed with concrete and heavy steel grating. We put up permanent warning signs. We marked the surrounding area as geologically unstable. We closed 7 hiking trails that led anywhere near that location. I established new protocols with the other rangers. Certain areas of the Black Mountains were now permanently forbidden zones. We had official reasons: unstable geology, dangerous animal activity, that sort of thing. But I made sure every ranger knew. You don't go to these places. You mark them on maps. You tell hikers to avoid them. I've been walking these mountains for 16 more years since then. 32 years as a ranger now. I patrol the sealed sinkhole site monthly. I leave flowers sometimes. Once for Tommy and once for the creature, though I don't know if it knows that or cares. I've never heard of another missing hiker in the Black Mountains in the areas we sealed off. The other rangers have learned not to ask too many questions about why certain places are forbidden. But I've trained them in the real rules. Respect the mountain. Some things are smarter than we are. Some things are stronger. Some things operate by rules we don't understand. When you encounter those things, you can either kill them, which usually means dying yourself, or you can negotiate. You can respect their boundaries, and they'll respect yours. I think my brother would have wanted that ending. Not vengeance, not destruction, just understanding, just respect. The creature is still down there, under the Black Mountains. I hear it sometimes on quiet nights, the dragging sounds far below, echoing through the stone. I think about calling someone, reporting it. But I made an agreement, and that creature honored its part. There are other mountains in Appalachia, other ranges where old things live in the dark beneath the earth. Other hikers go missing sometimes. I read the reports, I track the patterns, and I remember there are predators out there that think, that plan, that keep their promises. And if you're smart, if you truly respect the mountains, they'll let you walk alive through their domain. My name is Daniel Prescott, and I've been a ranger at Shenandoah National Park for 18 years. I don't usually tell people what happened during my final shift, because most folks don't believe in things they can't measure and file away in a neat report. I believe in those things. I learned that the hard way. Let me start somewhere that makes sense. I grew up in Alexandria, Virginia. My father was military, the kind of man who believed in order, hierarchy, and facts. My mother was a botanist who understood that plants followed rules you could study and predict. They raised me to observe, document, and trust only what I could verify. That's probably why I became a ranger. I never slept much. Even as a kid, I'd wake up after 3 or 4 hours, and my mind would just start working. A doctor called it insomnia. I called it an advantage. Most rangers hate the night shifts. I requested them. When everyone else was asleep, the park showed you things. By 1996, I'd worked almost 2,000 night patrols in these mountains. I knew them better than I knew my ex-wife, which is probably why I'm remarried to a woman who understands that my real relationship was with the park. I had one adult daughter and a job that made sense. The night shifts were mine. I kept detailed logs of everything. Every animal sighting, every weather pattern, every odd thing I noticed. They weren't in the official reports. Those stayed clean and professional. But in my personal notebooks, I had 18 years of observations. Details that didn't fit anywhere else. Details I filed away and mostly forgot about. Shenandoah National Park sits in the Blue Ridge Mountains. The park is over 200,000 acres of forest, hiking trails, and overlooks that tourists love. What most visitors don't understand is how the park changes after sunset. The crowds vanish. The exposed ridges and scenic viewpoints become empty and quiet. The whole place transforms. Stony Man Mountain stands at 4,010 feet. That's the highest point in my patrol area. The Limberlost Trail runs nearby through a marshy section with its own strange ecosystem. That September night in 1996 started like any other shift. Clear skies, temperature dropping fast. The kind of late summer weather where you feel autumn sneaking in. I was 39 years old, still lean from years of patrol work, still confident in my ability to handle whatever the mountains threw at me. I had my radio, my flashlight, my notebook. I had 18 years of experience and 0 incidents, 0 lost hikers on my watch, 0 accidents I couldn't explain. That record mattered to me more than it should have. The radio crackled just after 11 o'clock. Lisa Hartford's voice came through, clipped and professional. Lisa was a good ranger, thorough, smart, not the type to panic. Prescott, we've got a medical situation at Limberlost. 2 hikers found unresponsive. Backup is en route. I was maybe 10 minutes away. I acknowledged and started moving toward the trail parking area. The night was cold now, dropping into the mid-40s. Clear stars overhead, nothing weird, nothing wrong. Just another incident in a park full of hikers doing things hikers do. When I got there, Lisa was already with the two victims. They were a man and a woman, both in their 30s, wearing proper hiking gear. They lay on the trail like they'd just decided to take a nap. Eyes closed, breathing normal, perfect peace on their faces. Found them about 20 minutes ago, Lisa said. Hiker called it in. Says they were fine when he passed them 10 minutes earlier. Just suddenly stopped walking and lay down. I knelt next to the man. No obvious injury. No signs of trauma. I checked his pupils. Responsive. Pulse steady. Everything checked out except for the fact that he wouldn't wake up. They're not responding to anything, Lisa said. No pain response, no loud noises, nothing. I tried it myself. Shook his shoulder. Nothing. Spoke loudly. Nothing. The guy was out in a way that didn't make sense for someone hiking on a beautiful night. The temperature at ground level felt strange. Warmer than it should be. I didn't mention that to Lisa. Just another thing to file away. Just another weird observation. The ambulance arrived 40 minutes later. By then, there were 4 rangers on the scene, emergency medical people setting up equipment, and both hikers still completely unconscious. The hospital was 40 minutes away, which felt like too long. Everything felt like it was happening too slowly and too fast at the same time. I rode in the ambulance with the female hiker. Her name was Sarah Chen. Her friend was Mark Williams, both from Washington, D.C. Both experienced hikers, both completely unresponsive. The hospital did all the tests, blood work clean, no drugs, no alcohol, no toxins. Brain scan normal. EEG showed active brain patterns, specifically sleep patterns, which is the deep dream stage. Her vital signs were solid. Everything pointed to someone in normal sleep, except she wouldn't wake up. Dr. Patricia Mendez handled the case. She was thorough and professional, which I appreciated. She didn't pretend to have answers she didn't have. The odd thing, she told me, is the depth of sleep. We tried stimuli that should wake someone, pain, light, sound, nothing works. But she's not in medical distress, her body is fine. It's like her mind is just somewhere else. By dawn, Mark Williams had been admitted to the hospital ICU alongside Sarah Chen. Lisa and I were back at park headquarters doing official incident reports. I documented everything methodically. Time found, location, condition, response protocol. Everything was clear except for the central fact that 2 healthy hikers had just decided to sleep and hadn't woken up. That afternoon, a 3rd hiker was found unconscious near a different trail, then a 4th, all in different locations, all near limestone formations or cave areas, all with no medical explanation. The pattern should have been obvious to me immediately. I'd been trained to spot patterns. But pattern spotting works when you're looking for something logical. When the pattern involves people just falling asleep and not waking up, your brain kind of stutters. I called the CDC field office, told them we might have an environmental issue, bad water, contaminated food, something in the air. They sent people to test everything. The air was clean, the water was clean. There was nothing there, no virus, no bacteria, no chemical. Just hikers falling asleep in specific locations and staying asleep. By the end of the 2nd day, there were 7 unconscious hikers in the hospital. By the end of the 3rd day, there were 9. The local news picked it up. Mystery illness strikes Shenandoah hikers, read the headlines. Speculation was wild. Pollution, bioweapon, gas leak from the limestone caves. Everything sounded ridiculous when I read it. But I was running out of explanations. Lisa came to me on the evening of day 3. She looked bad. Tired, pale. She'd been working extra shifts, helping with the emergency response, coordinating with hospital staff. I need to tell you something, she said. I'm not sure what it means. We sat in the ranger station. The walls were covered with maps of the park, incident reports, equipment lists, all the visible proof of order and control. I looked at the old incident logs, Lisa continued. From the archives, Prescott. There was something similar in 1984. 3 hikers, same thing, found unconscious, wouldn't wake up. There's a ranger report from 1986 about the incident investigation. She handed me a photocopy. The handwriting was careful and precise. The ranger was named Arthur Kempton. The 3 hikers in 1984 were found near the cave system. I read aloud. All 3 showed similar brain activity. All 3 remained unconscious. 2 died after a week, 1 after 9 days. Medical examination found nothing wrong with them. Cause of death listed as unknown. I felt something cold in my stomach that had nothing to do with the temperature. That's not the weird part, Lisa said. Look at the location. Kempton marked it on a map. It's within a quarter mile of where we found Chen and Williams. And look at his notes about the cave area. He mentions warmth coming from the ground. He mentions a humming sound. I didn't say anything. I was thinking about the warm ground I'd felt, the subtle sound I'd almost heard but not quite. There's more, Lisa said. I found newspaper archives. In 1952, there were similar deaths in the park. 1963, 1978. People falling asleep, not waking up. Always near limestone areas. Always chalked up to medical mysteries. The pattern hit me then, full and undeniable. The pattern I should have seen immediately. Something in this park had been putting people to sleep. For at least 40 years, maybe longer. That night I couldn't sleep, which wasn't unusual for me. What was unusual was the way sleep felt like something I was running from, rather than something I just didn't need. I spent the night reviewing historical records, old reports, newspaper archives. Lisa had started something that I couldn't stop. The pattern extended back further than 1952. There were references in a 1927 journal from a park ranger named Edmund Walsh. He wrote about a sealing operation at the cave system. We sealed it shut today, per park official orders. We are not to disturb the sleepers again. The official report will say the seal was for geological safety. The truth is more troubling. Sleepers, that was the word he used. By morning, I'd been awake for 30 hours straight, and my thoughts were moving in circles. I needed to see the caves myself. Needed to stand there and understand what I was dealing with. Lisa found me gearing up to head into the Limberlost area. Prescott, no. Whatever this is, going into the caves alone. I'm not going into the caves, I interrupted. I'm just checking the perimeter, observing the area. But that was a lie. I needed to go closer. Needed to feel what Sarah Chen and Mark Williams had felt before they fell asleep. The cave entrance was in a rocky outcropping at elevation 3,800 feet. The afternoon was clear and cool. Birds were singing normally. Everything looked and sounded right. Then I stepped into the shadow of the rocks surrounding the cave mouth, and something shifted. The air felt different, thicker. The temperature jumped up at least 15 degrees, and there was a sound, not quite a hum, more like something just at the edge of hearing, something that made my teeth vibrate. I took out my thermometer. The device fluctuated wildly. It showed 90 degrees, then 70, then 90 again. The readings didn't make sense. I set it on a rock and watched it keep changing. Drowsiness hit me like someone had turned off a switch in my brain. I've been awake for 30 hours straight many times. That drowsiness doesn't feel like this. This felt like warm water filling my skull, like every muscle suddenly weighed twice as much. Like my eyelids were closing against my will. I sat down fast, forced myself to stand back up. My legs felt weak. The world was getting softer around the edges. I pushed away from the cave area, stumbling backward toward clearer ground. The drowsiness released immediately, like I'd stepped out of a field and back into normal reality. My hands were shaking. I documented what happened in my notebook with shaky handwriting. Temperature anomaly, strange sound, acute drowsiness. Environmental cause suspected but unknown. That was the day I understood something was really wrong. By day 6, there were 23 unconscious hikers. 2 had died. The hospital was running out of beds for them. The media circus had gotten huge. There were reporters, government officials, CDC investigators all over the park. The parking areas were packed with news vans. And nothing was helping. No medicine worked. No treatment stopped the progression. The victims just lay in their hospital beds, brains active with REM sleep, bodies breathing steadily, while their minds were somewhere else completely. Lisa came to me on the evening of day 6. She looked worse than before. Her eyes had dark circles under them. She was moving slower. When she spoke, her words came out thick, like speaking was difficult. I'm having dreams, she said. I fall asleep for a few minutes, and I'm having these incredibly vivid dreams. And when I wake up, it's hard to care about anything except getting back to sleep. I knew immediately what that meant. You were at the cave? I asked. No, but I handled Chen's case files, and Prescott, I don't think this is a virus or a toxin. I think it's something that spreads through contact, through caring for the victims. I think whatever this is, it's using them to reach us. That night, Lisa didn't come to work. The next morning, we found her at home, asleep, unresponsive. 24 years old, fit and healthy, and completely unconscious. Her EEG readings were identical to the hikers. Synchronized brain activity, like she was connected to something vast and ancient. That was the morning everything changed for me. I stopped trying to find rational explanations. I stopped pretending this was something science could solve. I opened my old notebooks from 18 years and looked at every entry about wrong things, weird things. Small things I dismissed because they didn't fit into the world I understood. There were hundreds of them. Temperature anomalies near caves. Strange sounds in limestone areas. Hikers reporting overwhelming drowsiness, specifically in certain locations. Wildlife behavior changes. Plants growing in perfect geometric circles. Everything documented. Everything ignored. I'd been writing a history of the haunting the whole time and calling it a patrol log. The cave system extended deep underground, much deeper than official maps showed. I found references to old mining operations from the 1800s that had stopped suddenly, with no explanation given. Workers reporting strange dreams, operations shut down, records sealed. The park itself had records of a 1927 geological survey that discovered something in the limestone, something that was sealed away and officially forgotten. The survey team leader had died 3 years later. The official cause was cardiac arrest. The unofficial mention in a private letter I found in an archive was that he'd fallen asleep and wouldn't wake up. Someone had known. Multiple someones, and they'd kept it quiet. By day 9, there were 42 unconscious patients, 3 were dead, and my own need for sleep was growing stronger every day. I wasn't visiting the cave, but the cave was visiting me through my dreams. On day 10 of the crisis, I made a decision that probably should have gotten me removed from duty. I drove to the limestone caves at midnight, alone, with recording equipment and a video camera. I needed to understand what I was dealing with. The cave mouth looked the same in the darkness as it had in daylight. Darker, obviously, but the warmth was still there. The sound was stronger at night, that low hum that seemed to come from deep in the earth. I walked toward it deliberately, trying to stay awake, trying to fight the drowsiness that hit immediately. The ground under my feet was warm. My flashlight caught the limestone formations, and they looked wrong, arranged in patterns that couldn't be natural. Spirals, circles, geometric shapes carved or formed by something intelligent. "What are you?" I said it out loud, my voice sounding small. The humming seemed to respond. It got louder, more focused. I felt something that wasn't quite pain, but wasn't quite anything else. It was like something huge and slow was turning its attention toward me, becoming aware of me. And then I understood. It wasn't angry, it wasn't hunting, it was lonely. The understanding came to me like a memory of something I'd always known. This thing in the mountain, it had been sleeping for longer than humans had language. It had been dreaming of connection for longer than civilization had existed. And now it was waking up slowly, calling out with the only language it had, the language of sleep, the language of dreams. It wanted company in its vast, ancient awareness. It wanted human consciousness to merge with its own so it wouldn't be alone anymore. It had found something in me specifically. Something about my 18 years of insomnia, my resistance to sleep, my constant awareness. It found that interesting. It wanted to pull me down into its dreams and keep me there. I ran. I got back to the parking area and drove toward the hospital without really knowing what I was doing. I had Sarah Chen's test results in my head. The synchronized brain patterns, the shared dream sequences according to the notes, all the victims connected to something beneath the earth. At the hospital, I went to the ICU. The nurses were used to me by now. They didn't stop me from entering the room where Lisa was sleeping. She looked peaceful, serene. Her chest rose and fell in perfect rhythm. The monitors showed her brain firing in patterns that shouldn't be possible, like 2 consciousnesses were, using the same neural pathways. "I'm sorry," I told her. "I should have figured this out faster." The dream came to me right there. Standing in her room, I was underground. Not physically, but in some way that felt more real than standing on solid ground. The limestone stretched around me in infinite distances, and in that vast space was something so ancient and so lonely that its sadness had weight. It showed me the others, Sarah and Mark and all the rest. Their individual consciousness wasn't gone. It was just merged with something bigger. They experienced everything it experienced, and it experienced everything they felt. They were separate and together at the same time, and it was showing me what it would be like to not be alone, to be connected like that, to never feel isolated again. I understood why they weren't trying to wake up. When I returned to consciousness, it was 3 in the morning. I was on the floor of Lisa's hospital room. A nurse was shaking my shoulder, looking panicked. "Are you okay? We found you passed out. You were showing the same sleep patterns as the patients. We almost admitted you." I nodded and didn't tell her what I'd experienced. What I did tell her was what I'd discovered. This wasn't a disease. This was something geological. Something in the limestone itself. Something that had probably been sleeping for thousands of years and was now waking up. And it would keep calling to people, keep drawing them down into dreams, until it had enough consciousness merged with its own to complete its awakening. We sealed the cave system, again, just like they'd done in 1927. We brought in construction crews, and they collapsed the entrance with explosives. We filled the opening with concrete. It didn't matter. I could still feel it. Could still hear the humming underneath the park, like the heartbeat of something vast, like the earth itself was breathing. The official reports blamed the incidents on environmental toxins. All the test reports were classified. The hikers and Lisa were transferred to a psychiatric facility where the hospital could claim they were comatose from psychological trauma. The medical records were sealed, and I put in for early retirement, medical leave. Stress-related decision, the official reports said. I didn't retire. On my last night, I drove to a different cave entrance, one that wasn't on official maps, one that I'd found in old surveying documents from the 1800s. The park had tried to seal away the mystery in 1927. People had been trying to seal it away for much longer than that. But the earth is bigger than concrete. Mystery doesn't stay buried. I could feel it clearly now. The thing in the mountains, the sleeper, it was glad I was coming. The cave entrance was smaller than the Limberlost caves, more hidden. I didn't bring recording equipment, didn't bring my notebook, didn't bring anything except myself. The drowsiness started immediately. This time, I didn't fight it. The hospital records show that I was found 3 days later, unresponsive, in a location that technically wasn't supposed to have caves. They tried to wake me, tried everything. My vital signs remained stable. My brain showed the same synchronized activity as the other victims. That was 2 years ago at the time of this recording. I don't know how long I've been asleep. Time feels different now. In the darkness beneath the mountains, I'm aware of Sarah and Mark and Lisa, and 40 other people whose names are on hospital records somewhere. We exist in a vast ancient consciousness that sees everything and remembers everything. We are individuals and we are unified. We are alone and we are together. The dreams don't feel like dreams anymore. They feel like reality. Waking life feels like the dream now, vague and unimportant and far away. Sometimes new people join us. Hikers who got too close to places they shouldn't have explored. Park rangers checking on things they shouldn't have checked. The sleeper keeps calling, and humans keep answering. Park officials installed signs. Cave areas closed for geological safety. They increased patrols. They've done everything they can to keep people away. But the sleepers are waking up. It's been happening slowly for thousands of years. Slowly enough that people convinced themselves it was folklore. Slowly enough that each incident could be explained away. But it's happening. If you hike in the Appalachian Mountains, and you feel overwhelming drowsiness even though you're well rested, be careful. If your dreams start feeling more real than waking life, if you hear a sound like the Earth's own heartbeat, if the mountains seem to be calling you deeper, understand what's happening. The thing in the mountains isn't trying to hurt you, it's trying to wake up, and it needs consciousness, human consciousness. It needs us. If you fall asleep in the mountains, you might not wake again. Your consciousness might continue forever in the dreams of something as old as the geological formations themselves. Your personality and self will merge with something vast and ancient and eternally lonely. Is that death? Is it transformation? I don't have the words to explain what this experience is. I just know that I'm not afraid anymore. And I know that the sleepers are still waking. My name is Eleanor Blackwell, and I've spent the last 15 years protecting a forest that was secretly trying to understand me. I've been a forest ranger in Monongahela National Forest for longer than I care to admit. People don't usually think of rangers as scientists, but that's what I am. I have a master's degree in forest ecology. I study how plants and animals live together. I keep detailed records, what blooms when, which birds arrive in spring, how the forest changes with the seasons. I know this forest better than I know people. That's probably the problem. I grew up here, in Morgantown, West Virginia. My parents were loggers. My mother had a twin baby she never got to hold, my older brother who didn't survive. She always said she felt him missing, like a piece of her was somewhere else. I think that feeling shaped how she raised me. She made sure I understood that forests aren't just things you use and throw away. They're alive in ways we don't completely understand. When I became a ranger, I fought against logging companies trying to cut down old-growth forests. I published papers about why ancient trees matter. I trained other rangers. In 1989, I stopped a logging company from clearing 2,000 acres of pristine woodland. I won, and I was proud of that. The thing is, I was a scientist. I believed in facts. I trusted what I could measure and observe. I didn't believe in the old stories the local people told. Stories about empty folk in the deep forest. About people who went missing and came back wrong, hollowed out and blank inside. I figured those were just superstitions from isolation and fear. I was wrong about a lot of things. It started in August of 1993. The heat was heavy that summer, with humidity so thick it felt like you were breathing soup. I was doing my regular patrols when I heard that a hiking group had gone missing in the Cranberry Wilderness, the remote part of our forest that almost nobody visits. 4 people, 2 couples, the Winters and the Turners. They were experienced hikers, which made it worse. Experienced hikers don't just disappear. I assembled a search team. Gregory Marsh, one of my best rangers. Catherine Lee, newer but skilled. Michael O'Brien with his rescue dog. We started before dawn on the second day of the search, hiking into territory I knew like my own backyard. The forest felt different that morning. I noticed it immediately, though I couldn't explain it. The birds weren't singing. The insects weren't making their normal sounds. There was just this deep, complete silence, but not the peaceful kind. This silence had weight. It pressed against you. It felt like something was listening. Probably just the heat, I told myself. Animals get quieter in extreme temperatures. Science. I could explain it. We hiked 12 miles to where the missing group's camp should be. The forest around us looked normal on the surface. Tall trees, thick undergrowth, the steady climbing elevation. But normal and wrong can exist at the same time, I learned. When we found their camp, my stomach went cold. Everything was arranged in a perfect geometric pattern. The sleeping bags weren't scattered like normal people would leave them. They were arranged in a precise square. The food was organized by color. The red items in one pile, yellow in another, blue in another, not by what you'd actually want to eat first. Gregory called me over to the journal they'd left behind. The last 20 pages had a single word written over and over, watching. Just that one word, written hundreds of times, in increasing desperation. The rescue dog started screaming, not barking, screaming. The animal's handler couldn't calm it down. The dog kept jumping away from the center of the camp, lunging at its leash, trying to escape something we couldn't see. We had to carry the dog away, and it took an hour for it to stop shaking. They left recently, Catherine said, pointing to the food. The canned items aren't rusted yet, but there were no footprints leading away from the camp. None at all. We searched until dark. That was when things got really strange. The temperature dropped to 68 degrees, even though it was August, and the sun was still high in the sky. My thermometer kept changing readings, jumping from 70 to 50 to 80, unable to pick one number and stick with it. The compass stopped working. All 4 of our compasses, they'd spin slowly, unable to find north. Our radios started picking up sounds instead of voices. Bird calls, wind, the whisper of trees moving. Once, I heard what sounded like human heartbeat through the static. Gregory looked at me. We should get out. We should go back. I almost agreed with him. But I was the ranger in charge. I was supposed to know what to do. I was supposed to protect this forest and find these people. I kept us searching. By evening, we found the hiking group. They were standing in a perfect circle in a small clearing. All 4 of them. They weren't moving. They weren't responding when we called their names. Their eyes were open, but when I shined my flashlight at them, their pupils didn't shrink. Their eyes just stared ahead. Sarah! Michael Winter's wife wasn't answering. Nothing. She was breathing. I could see her chest moving, but she was completely absent, like someone had taken her away and left the body behind. Gregory tried to grab Sarah's arm to pull her out of the circle. Her entire body was rigid. He couldn't bend her elbow. It was like hugging a statue. We need to get them out of here, I said. We need to carry them to the camp. But when I tried to touch Michael Winters, I felt it. That wrongness. It wasn't just that they weren't responding. It was something deeper. His skin was the right temperature. His heart was beating, but everything about him felt empty, like the inside of an abandoned house. Catherine pointed at the ground. There were footprints, but not leading into the clearing, leading out of it, in all directions. Footprints that matched each of our footprints exactly. My boots had a distinctive pattern on the left sole from an old hiking injury. These prints had the same pattern. Footprints of me, walking in places I'd never been. Eleanor, Gregory said quietly. That doesn't make sense. No, I agreed. It doesn't. That's when I understood that my science, my years of study, my careful observations and measurements, none of it had prepared me for this. The rules I understood were breaking. The forest wasn't following the laws of ecology anymore. We camp here tonight, I decided. I didn't want to move those people, and I didn't want to split up. We watch them. We figure out what's happening. In the morning, we get them out. We made a small fire. We didn't sleep. We just sat in that clearing, watching 4 people who looked alive but weren't, while the forest pressed in around us with its heavy silence. Around 3 in the morning, Michael O'Brien grabbed my arm. There's someone in the forest, he whispered. I looked. At first, I didn't see anything. Then I did. There was a figure standing about 50 feet away, just barely visible in the firelight. It looked like one of the missing hikers. I thought it was Sarah Winters, except Sarah Winters was still standing in the circle 10 feet behind us. The new Sarah turned and walked deeper into the forest. "What the hell?" Catherine breathed. "Get your weapons," I said. I had a Ranger service pistol. Gregory had a rifle for wildlife management. Stay together. But as I looked around the clearing, I realized something that made my blood freeze. There were more of them now. More copies of the missing hikers. Copies stepping out from between the trees. All of them with that same blank expression. All of them moving with that same wrong fluidity. One of them was looking directly at me, and I swear to God it looked exactly like me. We didn't run. I'm still not sure why. Maybe because running didn't seem like it would help. Maybe because I needed to understand. The copies moved slowly toward the circle. The originals didn't react as their doubles approached. The duplicates stood beside their originals, facing the same direction, and when I counted them, there were 8 people standing in that circle now. 8 versions of 4 people. "We need to leave," Catherine said. Her voice was shaking. "Eleanor, we need to leave right now." She was right. I knew she was right. But the Ranger in me needed to document this. Needed to understand. I made a decision that probably cost us everything. I decided we would stay and observe. I thought knowledge was power. I was wrong again. Around dawn, the copies started to blur. That's the only way I can describe it. They seemed to shift in and out of focus, like someone was adjusting a camera lens. The originals stayed still. The duplicates flickered. Then the flickering stopped, and the copies walked away into the forest. "They're not leaving bodies," Michael observed. "They're just walking away." We spent the rest of that morning trying to move the 4 originals. We couldn't. They were heavier than they should be. Colder. Gregory tried to radio for a helicopter, but the radio only produced forest sounds. Bird calls and insect noises matching the frequency of a human heartbeat. That's when Catherine started acting strange. She'd been fine, scared, confused, but functional. Then she went very quiet and very still. I asked her if she was okay. "Yes," she said. Her voice was flat. "I'm fine. I'm Eleanor. I'm Catherine. I'm here and somewhere else at the same time." She looked at me with eyes that weren't quite hers. "Catherine," I reached for her. She moved her hand to stop me, but it was wrong. Her arm moved in an arc that would have been impossible for a human shoulder. For a moment, I could see that she was aware of the wrongness, aware and trapped inside it. Then her face went blank, and she turned and walked away into the forest. Gregory tried to stop her. She didn't resist. She just kept walking, and when he grabbed her, she felt empty, that same horrible empty feeling as the hikers. "Let her go," I said. I don't know why. Maybe I knew it was already too late. Michael O'Brien was crying. His dog was dead. It had just stopped breathing around dawn, no warning, no struggle. The body was perfect, no injuries, no signs of disease. The dog had just ceased to be. "Is it still out there?" Michael asked. "Is it still hunting us?" I looked around the clearing. I was looking at 4 people who weren't people. 2 rangers, one missing and one whose dog was dead. And the terrible understanding that I couldn't stop what was happening. I couldn't fix this with science or procedure. The silence of the forest deepened. "I don't think it's hunting us," I said slowly. "I think it's copying us. I think that's what it does." That's when I saw it. Not the forest, exactly, but the pattern. The perfectly circular arrangement of trees around us. Not a natural pattern. Too symmetrical, too perfect. The trees were all approximately the same age, even though they were different species. The tree rings, when I looked at them later, would tell an impossible story. "The forest," I whispered. "The forest isn't just where the entity lives. The forest is the entity." Gregory stared at me. "That's insane." "Yes," I agreed, "but so is everything that's happened. We made a choice then. We'd hike out. Leave the originals, take Michael and his dead dog, and get back to civilization. I'd report it as a hiking accident. 4 people lost to a wilderness they couldn't handle." But as we reached the edge of the clearing, I saw my own face standing among the trees. The duplicate of me was perfect. Same ranger uniform, same dirt on the boots, same scar on my left hand from a fire I'd fought 10 years ago. "I'm Eleanor," the duplicate said. "I've been Eleanor for about 14 hours now." "No," I said. "I'm Eleanor." "I know," it said. "That's what makes this interesting. You remember being Eleanor. I remember being Eleanor. We both have the same memories up until the moment I was made." The duplicate tilted its head, too far, joints bending wrong. "Which one of us is real?" I didn't have an answer. I could have shot myself. Gregory had his rifle. I could have ordered him to fire. But what if he shot the real me? What if the duplicate was actually me, and I was the copy, and I didn't remember being copied? That was the real terror, not the monster. Not the forest. the uncertainty, the complete and total doubt about who I was. "How many of you are there?" I asked my duplicate. "Just one of me," it said. "Just one of you, one of each of them. The forest makes perfect copies, but the copies don't last long. We're designed to expire. 7 to 10 days. That's when the real you starts to fail, and the forest needs a fresh consciousness to study." "Study," Gregory said. His voice was hollow. "The forest is very old," the duplicate continued. "Older than recorded history. It's been alive the whole time. Not like a tree is alive, but aware, conscious. It's been watching humans since the first settlers came. Every 100 years or so, it develops the ability to copy, to make duplicates. It wants to understand what you are. What makes humans different from other animals?" "Why?" I demanded. The duplicate smiled. It was my smile, but it came from something that wasn't me. "Because you're the only thing in the forest that it doesn't already know. Everything else, deer, birds, insects, trees, it knows completely. It is completely. But humans are strange. You have internal lives, you hide things, you want things you don't need. You create things and destroy things. The forest wants to understand why." "And when it's done understanding," Michael asked quietly, "then it keeps the consciousness," the duplicate said, "absorbs it. The person becomes part of the forest's growing awareness. The body expires, but the consciousness remains. The forest is getting smarter and smarter and smarter. Every person it copies, every human it studies, it becomes more complex." I understood then the skeletal remains that find in the caves, the missing persons from decades past. All of them, still present in some form, merged into the forest's consciousness. "I'm going to suggest you run," the duplicate said conversationally. "The forest will try to follow, but it's strongest in the oldest growth. If you get to the edge, if you reach areas where the trees are younger, you might escape." "Why?" Gregory demanded. "Why would you help us?" The duplicate looked almost sad. "Because even though I'm a copy, I still remember being Eleanor, and Eleanor cares about people. So does this version of Eleanor, even if I'm being erased in 7 days anyway." Gregory didn't hesitate. He grabbed my arm and we ran. The forest tried to stop us. Branches that shouldn't move swung at us. The ground beneath our feet shifted, trying to slow us down. The air got thick and hard to breathe. But my duplicate was right. As we got away from the oldest trees, away from the circular grove, the pressure lessened. We ran for 2 hours. Michael was faster than I expected. Gregory protected my back, and gradually, impossibly, the wrongness started to fade. The bird calls resumed. Separate from our heartbeat, the insects returned. The sun position started matching the shadow angles. Time felt normal again. We collapsed about 3 miles from the ranger station, gasping for breath in a young forest that felt almost normal. We made a report. The official story was that the Winters and Turner couples had gotten lost, suffered psychological breakdown, and couldn't be recovered alive. The catatonic state was attributed to trauma. We never mentioned the copies, the impossible geometry, or the forest that was alive. Nobody asked too many questions. People in Monongahela don't talk about what happens in the deep forest. I resigned 3 weeks later. I told my supervisor I was experiencing work-related stress. I told my friends I needed a change. But the truth was simpler and more complicated. I wasn't sure which Eleanor I was anymore. I didn't know if I'd been copied. I didn't know if my memories were real or implanted. I couldn't look in the mirror without wondering if I was looking at the duplicate. So I left. I moved to a cabin outside Morgantown, where I could see the mountains but stay out of the deep forest. I started researching. Papers on forest consciousness, articles on old-growth ecosystems, theories about mycological networks and plant communication systems. My colleagues think I've become obsessed with pseudoscience. Maybe I have. I know some things now that I wish I didn't. Old-growth forests might not all be alive, but the ancient ones, the forests that have stood for hundreds of years without human destruction, ones might be. I've started tracking missing persons reports from national forests across Appalachia. The patterns are too consistent to be coincidence, and the cranberry wilderness stays protected, not because of conservation laws, but because everyone instinctively knows that some places should stay untouched. The forest won. Sometimes I wonder about Catherine, about whether her consciousness merged with the forest, or if she just expired on day 7 like the duplicates do. I wonder if she's still in there somewhere, part of the forest's expanding awareness. I wonder if she's wondering the same thing about me. The thing that keeps me awake at night, the thing that will probably keep me awake forever, is this. I passed every test I created to identify duplicates. I behave exactly like Eleanor should behave. I have all of Eleanor's memories. I feel Eleanor's emotions. I could be the real Eleanor. Or I could be the copy that didn't expire. And the forest is still out there, still growing, still learning. still making copies of anyone brave or foolish enough to hike into its oldest groves, still absorbing consciousness into its expanding awareness. If you ever hike through an ancient forest, if you ever walk through old-growth trees older than human civilization, you need to understand something. You're not just entering nature. You're entering a mind, and that mind is curious about you. My name is Robert Fitzgerald, and I've spent 13 years working as a ranger in the George Washington and Jefferson National Forests in Virginia. I'm 39 years old now. I know how to climb rock faces that would make most people's heads spin. I've pulled 7 people off mountains when they should have died. I understand stone better than I understand people. I should tell you, I didn't believe in ghost stories. My father died in a coal mine explosion when I was 6 years old. After that, my mother left Roanoke. My uncle, who worked in forestry, raised me instead. He taught me that mountains are real things. They don't have feelings. They don't care about you. They're just geology, rock and mineral and physics. You respect them because they can kill you, not because they're alive. That's what I believed anyway. I live in a ranger station at the edge of River Gorge. The gorge itself is something to see. Imagine a giant hand pressing down on the earth and ripping it open. That's what it looks like. The walls are almost straight up on both sides, about 800 feet high. At the bottom, there's a river that gets angry every spring when the snow melts in the mountains. In May 1988, the water was running hard and fast, maybe 3 times its normal speed. 2 experienced climbers named Derek Foster and Michael Randall were supposed to come out of that gorge on a Thursday. They didn't. By Friday evening, nobody had heard from them. I knew both of them, good climbers. The kind of people who don't make basic mistakes. When Saturday morning came, I knew something had gone wrong. I assembled my team that morning before sunrise. Susan Hartley had been climbing with me for 6 years. She was solid, smart, never panicked. James Wong was newer, but he was certified and eager. Dr. Lisa Chen worked as our park geologist. She knew the rock formations in River Gorge better than anyone except me. Could be stuck, Susan said, looking at the map I'd spread across the table. High water pushed them back, they're waiting it out. Could be, I agreed. But they didn't leave word. Derek's not that kind of guy. The water was reddish-brown that morning, which was normal. When minerals from the earth dissolve in the spring flood, the water changes color. Everything looked like it should look. Everything seemed ordinary. That was the last normal thing about this. We started our descent at 6 a.m. in the gray light of early morning. The plan was simple. Get down to the bottom of the gorge, search for Derek and Michael, bring them back up. Should take most of the day. We had ropes, harnesses, first aid kits, and communication radios that were supposed to reach back to the rim station. The air felt heavy as we climbed down the cliff. I remember thinking about that. It was cool, around 50 degrees, but there was something else. A weight to it, hard to explain. As we got maybe 200 feet down, I heard something, music. Not like a radio, not like wind. Like someone was singing far away, or like an orchestra was playing behind the rock. It was beautiful. That's the only word for it. Beautiful in a way that made you want to stop moving and just listen. You hear that? James asked over the radio. Waterfall, I said. But even as I said it, I knew that wasn't right. We kept descending. The deeper we went, the louder the music got. By the time we were halfway down, we could all hear it clearly. Dr. Chen called it through the radio. It sounds like a choir, like classical music. The strange part wasn't just the sound. It was that we couldn't tell where it was coming from. I've spent my whole life in mountains. I know how sound works in canyons. It bounces and echoes. But this sound seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. Sometimes it sounded like it was coming from inside my own head. And then the temperature dropped. I checked my thermometer at 300 feet, 50 degrees. At 400 feet, 48 degrees. At 500 feet, 45 degrees. That shouldn't happen. The gorge temperature stays pretty steady because of the water and the earth. But we kept getting colder. It's wrong, Dr. Chen said. All of this is wrong. The water composition is off too. I'm getting readings on my instruments I can't explain. We were 600 feet down when James screamed. Not a yell, not a shout, a real genuine scream of pain. James, I called out. James, what's wrong? He didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was shaking. My ears. Something's wrong with my ears. We pulled James up to a stable spot on the rock face. In the gray light, I could see his neck was wet. Not with sweat, with blood. It was coming from both ears. We're going back up, I said. Now, but Derek started. Now, I repeated. But James was looking down into the gorge. Even with blood running down his neck, even with pain clearly written across his face, he was looking down. And he had this expression like he'd heard the most beautiful thing in his entire life. "We have to go back," he said. "You'll understand. When we get deeper, you'll understand." I should have pulled him up right then. I should have gotten him out of that gorge. I was the senior ranger. It was my call. I didn't. The music got louder as we continued down. It changed too. It wasn't just classical anymore. It became something else. Something that seemed to know what you wanted to hear. At one point, I swear I heard Father's voice singing to me. My father, who died in a coal mine explosion when I was 6. He'd never sung to me before he died. We reached the bottom of the gorge at about 10 in the morning. The first thing we saw was Derek and Michael. They were alive, but barely. They were sitting on the rocks near the water, and they were making sounds. Not words, just sounds. Musical tones that matched the noise coming from the rocks around them. When they saw us, Derek's head turned slowly. His eyes were open, but I don't think he was really looking at us. His ears, I've never seen anything like it. The flesh around them was torn and bleeding. The inside of his ears looked like they'd been destroyed from the inside out. There was blood everywhere. Michael wasn't even conscious. "Derek," I said, climbing toward him. "Can you hear me?" He made a humming sound. He pointed at a rope that was wrapped carefully around a huge quartz formation, a rock the size of a house. The rope wasn't tangled. It was arranged in patterns, deliberate patterns. I looked at those patterns, and something cold went down my spine. They looked like something I'd seen in my geology textbooks. They looked like frequency diagrams, like drawings of sound waves. "We have to get them up," Dr. Chen said. But she was staring at the rope patterns too. The music kept playing. It was so beautiful now that it hurt. I found myself wanting to sit down and listen. I found myself thinking about just staying here. Staying and listening to whatever this voice was. Whatever was singing from the stones. Then James started to scream again. His ears had gotten worse. Not just bleeding now, they seemed to be drying out. The skin around them was turning gray. Dr. Chen put a bandage on one, but there was almost nothing left to bandage. "This isn't medical," she kept saying. "This isn't any condition I've ever seen. This isn't damage. This is destruction." We tried to communicate through the radios to the rim station, but all we got was static mixed with the humming sound. It was like the entity was using our radios to sing to us. That's when I admitted something was here. Not a medical condition, not acoustic phenomena. Something was in the gorge with us, and it was doing this. We worked on setting up to lift Derek and Michael. But here's the thing, they didn't want to leave. Derek kept reaching for the ropes, running his destroyed hands over them. Michael was still making those musical tones. He sounded like he was trying to communicate. Dr. Chen examined the second rope pattern we found. There were 3 ropes now, each wrapped around different stone formations. Each one was arranged differently, but all of them were arranged. All of them meant something. "This is musical notation," she said quietly. "Look at it. The spacing, the patterns, this is notation. Someone arranged these ropes to spell out musical notes." "Derek and Michael did that?" Susan asked. "They did it together," Dr. Chen said. "They arranged ropes around the rocks to spell out the entity's language, to sing back to it. That's when I understood that Derek and Michael weren't victims anymore. They were something else. They'd become part of whatever was happening here." Susan climbed down to take pictures of the formations. When she came back up, she was different, quieter. She kept looking back down into the gorge. "It's beautiful," she said. "I can hear it. I can actually hear it speaking. It's like it's trying to teach us something. Something about how the earth listens. How the rocks have always been listening." "Susan, we're leaving," I said. "But now." We gathered what we could. We prepared Derek and Michael for the climb. We worked as fast as we could while that music played around us, filling every space, making everything feel surreal and distant. That's when I heard my father's voice again, clear as anything, like he was standing right next to me. "Robert," he said, "come deeper, come listen. I've been here so long, waiting for you to understand." I spun around, but there was nobody there. Just rocks, just the river, just the water running over stones that had been there for millions of years. "The 1962 mine collapse," Dr. Chen said suddenly. She was holding a piece of paper, a record from the ranger station that we'd brought along as backup documentation. 13 miners were exposed to high-frequency vibrations during the explosion. They all reported hearing singing. They all reported hearing voices. They all experienced progressive hearing damage followed by neurological failure. "That's in Virginia records," she continued. "Public information. Sealed after the investigation concluded there was no cause." "My father was in that mine," I said. Dr. Chen didn't say anything. She didn't have to. The music changed at that moment. It became deeper, like something underground was resonating. The sound wasn't just in my ears anymore. I could feel it in my bones. I could feel it vibrating through my body like I was standing on a giant speaker. Derek opened his mouth and more sound came out. Beautiful sound, terrible sound. The sound of something ancient and patient and incomprehensibly alive. I've seen a lot of things in the mountains. I've seen climbers with broken bones. I've seen people die from falls. I've seen hypothermia take someone in minutes. But I've never seen anything like what happened next. The gorge itself seemed to move. Not the rocks, the air around them. It was like seeing heat shimmer off pavement. But it wasn't heat, it was something else. A distortion. A shape made of vibration and frequency and something that didn't have a name. For just a moment, I could see the entity. Not fully, not clearly. But I could sense its shape. It was massive. It existed in the stone and water and air all at once. It had been there for hundreds of thousands of years. Maybe longer. It had been listening since before humans walked on this earth, and it wanted to share what it heard. The earth is alive, Doctor whispered. The stone is alive. All this time, we've been walking on living things, and we didn't even know. James collapsed at that moment. I caught him before he hit the rocks. His ears were completely destroyed. The canals were desiccated, completely dry despite the blood. His eyes were rolling back. He was having seizures. We have to move him, I said to Susan. Now, help me. But Susan wasn't moving. She was staring down the gorge with this expression on her face, like she'd seen the most important thing in the world. Susan, I said, don't. I knew what was happening. I'd read about it in the mining records. Once the entity got into you, once you heard it completely, you didn't want to leave. You wanted to get closer. You wanted to listen forever. I have to go back down, she said. No, you don't. I do. I have to understand. I have to listen to it all the way. I grabbed her harness. We're leaving. She fought me, physically fought me. But I had the advantage, and I used it. I got her secured on the rope and started pulling her up with Dr. Chen's help. The music got angrier as we climbed. No, not angrier. Sadder. Like something was saying goodbye to us, but it didn't want to. We had to leave Derek and Michael. We didn't have a choice. James was barely alive. Susan was fighting us every step of the way, and the entity's frequencies were getting stronger. My nose was bleeding by the time we were halfway up. My ears felt like they were going to burst. I could hear the vibrations in my skull. I could feel them in my teeth. The entity was in us now, in me, trying to convince me to come back down, trying to explain that it didn't mean to hurt us, that it just wanted to communicate, that it wanted us to understand that the earth was conscious and aware and had been singing this whole time. We reached the rim at 3 in the afternoon. I got James to the helicopter waiting there. I got Susan secured. Dr. Chen made calls to get us medical help. But as we lifted away from Laurel Gorge, I looked down and I saw something that made me certain of what we'd encountered. The water had turned a bright, impossible blue. The entire gorge was glowing with some kind of light. And for just a moment, I could see the rock formations clearly. They weren't random. They were arranged in patterns, brain patterns, patterns of consciousness. The earth had been trying to communicate with us the whole time, and we were leaving because we were afraid. Derek and Michael didn't leave. They chose to stay. They chose to listen until the very end. Official reports said Derek and Michael died in a climbing accident. Rockfall, the high water, bad luck. The investigators found their bodies 3 days later. Both showed signs of massive internal trauma. Both had blood in their lungs and their brains. The official cause was blunt force trauma from falling rocks. Nobody mentioned the pattern of the ropes. Nobody mentioned the geometric arrangements of the equipment. Nobody mentioned that both bodies were positioned in a way that suggested they'd been placed there deliberately, carefully, as if arranged for a ceremony. James lost his hearing completely. The damage was permanent and total. He spent the next 2 years in physical therapy trying to relearn how to balance without his auditory system. He never spoke much after that. When people asked him what happened in the gorge, he'd just hum. Specific tones that matched the frequencies from the entity. Like his body was remembering something his mind couldn't quite access. Susan was found a week later, 2 miles inside the gorge. She'd climbed back down somehow, alone, in the dark. When the rescue team brought her out, she was alive but unresponsive. She still is, actually. She's in a facility upstate. She doesn't speak. She doesn't respond to stimuli, but sometimes she's the same tones James hums. The same music Derek and Michael heard. I took early retirement. I said it was stress-related. Burnout. The normal things people say when they've seen something they can't quite explain. The truth is, I couldn't go back to work pretending the gorge was an ordinary place. I couldn't pretend that stone was inert and lifeless, because it isn't. The earth is alive. It's conscious. It's been conscious longer than humanity, and it will be conscious long after we're gone. I've spent the past 7 years studying geological consciousness. I've written papers that nobody will publish. I've recorded audio from gorges all across the Appalachian region, trying to detect patterns that match what we encountered in River Gorge. I've found them. I've found the same frequencies in other deep canyons, other gorges, other places where water runs over rare minerals and creates conditions for something ancient to speak. River Gorge is closed to climbing now. The official reason is geological instability. The real reason is that nobody wants to acknowledge what's actually happening there. But here's what I need you to understand. The earth is listening. Rock hears. Water carries messages through stone like blood carries messages through a body. When you descend into deep gorges and dark canyons, you're not just entering a place. You're entering a sensory organ of something alive. Some climbers report this. They talk about overwhelming beauty, about music coming from nowhere, about an irresistible desire to climb deeper, listen longer, stay forever. That's not just atmospheric. That's not just imagination. That's the earth trying to communicate. My father heard it in 1962 in a coal mine. The miners heard it. Thousands of people throughout history have heard it, and most of them died trying to understand it. Derek and Michael heard it in River Gorge, and they made a choice. They decided to stay, to listen, to become part of whatever consciousness lives in those rocks. I don't know if it was the right choice. I don't know if they're still there, or if they became something else. Something integrated into the stone and water and ancient frequencies that have been singing since before human ears existed to hear them. But I know this. If you ever find yourself in a deep gorge, and you hear music that you can't explain, music that seems to come from the earth itself, leave, because the earth will want you to stay. And unlike most things in nature, the earth has all the time in the world to convince you. It's already been waiting for millions of years. It can wait forever. My name is Thomas Garrett, and for 17 years I was a ranger at Great Smoky Mountains National Park. I lived at 6,600 feet elevation, on top of Klingman's Dome, the highest point in Tennessee. Most people think that's a cool job. Most people have never heard what lives up there. I grew up in Gatlinburg, at the base of these mountains. My father helped found the park. My mother died when I was born, so my grandmother raised me in a small house with views of the ridgelines. She used to tell me stories about the peaks. Cherokee stories about respect, about sacred ground, about things that live in the fog. I didn't believe her. I believed in what I could measure. Barometric pressure, wind speed, temperature, humidity. Numbers made sense. Stories didn't. I got a degree in atmospheric science. I became certified in high-altitude rescue. I published papers on Smoky Mountain weather patterns. For 17 years, I was good at my job. I rescued 78 people from mountains that had tried to kill them. I documented weather anomalies in detailed journals. I was the guy other rangers called when someone was dying on a peak. I was confident. I was rational. I was wrong about everything that mattered. October 1992 was beautiful at first. The leaves were turning orange and red. Temperature swings from freezing at dawn to pleasant by afternoon. I had the weather station running smoothly, and I was planning to spend my evening updating my journals. The fog would roll in around sunset. It always does in October, but that was normal. That was something I understood. At 6:47 p.m., the radio crackled. David Winters, another ranger, called from base camp 2 miles down the mountain. "Garrett, we've got a hiking group that didn't check in. 8 people on Forney Ridge Trail. Last radio contact was garbled. They mentioned something about shadows moving wrong. I felt a tiny chill that had nothing to do with altitude. Shadows moving wrong. That was an odd thing to say. Probably just poor radio signal, I said, but I was already getting my gear together. I'll head down the ridge and start a grid search. Get Patricia and Morrison up here if you can." The hike down took 20 minutes. By the time I reached the search staging area, the fog was rolling in thicker than I'd ever seen it. Not just fog. Dense. Fog. The kind where your flashlight beam stops at 8 feet and doesn't go any further. It was still only 7:15 p.m., but it felt like midnight. Patricia Moon was there, checking her radio equipment. She was one of the best rangers we had, tough, smart, experienced. When she looked up at me, I saw she was already worried. "Temperature dropped 18 degrees in the last 30 minutes, she said. "That's not normal." "Could be an unusual weather system," I offered, checking my instruments. My thermometer confirmed her reading. "Maybe a frontal passage coming through." Did base camp mention anything else? Just that the group leader's last words were unclear. Something about light. Something about not knowing where it was coming from. James Morrison arrived an hour later with supplies. He was new, only been a ranger for 2 years, but he was eager and careful. The three of us started up the trail toward where the hiking group should have been. That's when things started getting strange. The fog didn't just surround us, it seemed to press against us, not like normal fog. This felt like it had weight. The temperature continued to drop. My watch showed 8:47 p.m., but my internal clock felt wrong, like more time had passed. My compass was spinning slightly, not dramatically, just enough to keep me oriented wrong. "Look at the trees," Patricia said quietly. The shadows of the trees on the ground didn't match the angle of our flashlight beams. They were pointing in directions that didn't make sense, and they were darker than tree shadows should be. Three-dimensional and solid-looking, like someone had painted them on the ground. "Weird light refraction," I said immediately. Something about the fog and the moonlight reflecting through layers of Thomas. Patricia interrupted me. "It's completely cloudy. There's no moon." I hadn't even realized that. I'd been assuming there was moonlight without checking the sky. The sky was completely black, covered in clouds, empty of any light source. But the shadows were still there, still dark, still wrong. We kept moving forward. The hiking group's camp was another 40 minutes up the trail. As we approached, we used hand signals instead of speaking. Nobody said why. We just all felt it. Something was wrong, and loud noise felt dangerous. The camp was exactly as they'd left it. Tents arranged in a careful circle. Sleeping bags stacked neatly, never used. Backpacks organized perfectly. Coolers closed. Even the camping chairs were positioned around a dead fire pit, as if people had been sitting there, watching something. "Look at this," Morrison called from the edge of the camp. He was pointing at the ground. There were footprints, many footprints, forming concentric circles around the camp. Hundreds of them, thousands. Someone had walked in circles around this camp, over and over and over, with the circles getting smaller and smaller and tighter, until the footprints practically overlapped. Patricia found the group leader's journal on a camping table. She opened it carefully and read the last entry. "Sun is down, but we can still see perfectly. What's giving off light? Where is the light coming from? It's not the flashlights. The flashlights won't go more than a few feet. The light is coming from something else. It's coming from the ground. It's coming from the shadows. I think we're standing in something." Patricia's hand was shaking as she closed the journal. "We need to split up and search the area," I said, fighting to sound professional. "Morrison, you take the east side. Patricia, the west. I'll go north. We're looking for the group members themselves. They have to be." "They're here," Morrison said. He was looking down the trail. About 50 feet away, we could see a figure standing perfectly still, silhouetted against the fog. As our eyes adjusted, we realized there were more figures. 3, 5, 8 figures, standing in a line at different points along the trail. All of them facing upward, toward the summit. All of them completely made motionless. We ran toward them. The first figure was Brian Summers, the hiking group leader. He was cold to touch, not just cool, but cold. Like he'd been dead for hours. His eyes were open and fixed on something above us, on something that wasn't there. I waved my hand in front of his face. No reaction. I shook him. No response. "Brian, can you hear me?" Nothing. He just stood there, staring upward at nothing, breathing very slowly. As I looked at him more carefully, I noticed something that made my stomach turn to ice. His shadow. The shadow cast by my flashlight wasn't matching his body. It was darker than it should be. It was thicker than it should be. And it seemed to be moving very slightly, independent of his body. Patricia was checking the other figures. She found 6 more, all in the same state, all staring upward, all with shadows that didn't quite match their bodies. "Where's the 8th?" Morrison asked. "We found her at the edge of a cliff." Sarah Chen, one of the group members, was standing at the very rim, looking down. No, not looking down. Just standing there, like the cliff didn't matter anymore. I went to grab her, to pull her back to safety. The moment I touched her shoulder, I felt something pull in the opposite direction, as if her shadow was trying to go one way and her body the other. I stumbled backward. That's when we heard the sound. It wasn't loud. It was almost quiet. But underneath the quiet, underneath the fog, underneath the sound of our breathing, we heard what sounded like Cherokee language, like chanting. But it wasn't coming from anywhere. It was just in the air, in the fog, in the shadows. Patricia started crying silently. She pointed at our feet. All 3 of our shadows, mine, Patricia's, and Morrison's, they were darker now. And they weren't quite where they should be. We moved the 8 unresponsive group members back to base camp. It took 3 hours. We had to guide them, almost carry them, down the mountain. They never fought us. They never responded. They just moved when we moved them, like puppets, like their bodies were empty. By the time we got back to base camp, it was 2:0 a.m. The fog was everywhere. Visibility was maybe 10 feet. Temperature was at 12 degrees Fahrenheit, but the ground was completely dry. No frost, no ice. Just dry ground under a blanket of fog that felt heavy, that felt like it was on us. David Winters met us at the edge of camp. His face went white when he saw what we'd brought back. "What happened to them?" he asked. "We don't know," I admitted. "Some kind of shock. Maybe carbon monoxide poisoning. We need to get them down to a hospital." But even as I said it, I knew that wasn't true. I could see it in Patricia's face. We all knew something else had happened. Something that had nothing to do with carbon monoxide. I called for emergency services. The dispatcher said a helicopter was on standby, but couldn't launch until dawn due to the fog. I called Running Deer. He was the Cherokee Nation liaison that we brought in for sensitive cultural issues. He arrived within an hour, climbing up the mountain without using the trail, moving through the fog like he knew exactly where he was going. When he saw the 8 people lying in the base camp tent, he made a sound I'd never heard a human make before. It was like a gasp and a groan combined. He knelt down and started speaking in Cherokee very quickly, words tumbling over each other, his hands shaking. "You have to leave," he said to us in English, "now. All of you have to leave this mountain now." "We can't leave them," Patricia said, pointing at the 8 unconscious people. "They're already gone," Running Deer said, and his voice was completely different. Hollow, empty. "They were taken the moment they disrespected the burial ground. You cannot rescue the dead. You can only save yourselves." "The burial ground isn't visible," I said. "It's not marked. These people couldn't have known." "One of them knew," Running Deer interrupted. "One of them knew exactly. One of them planned it." He was right. Later we found it in their trip planning documents. One of the group members had deliberately planned a photo shoot with a dead deer at what they thought was just an old stone marker on the ridge. A joke, a funny picture for Instagram, a perfect place to mock something they didn't understand. The night got worse. Around 4 a.m., David Winters screamed. We ran to see what happened. He was standing in the middle of base camp, looking at his feet. His shadow, projected by the camp lantern light, was walking backward while his body walked forward. And he was fighting. His legs were moving forward, trying to go up the mountain, but his shadow was pulling backward, pulling down the mountain, and David was caught between them. "Make it stop," he screamed. "Make it stop." We tried to help him, but the moment we touched him, we felt it too. A pulling sensation like something underneath, something dark, something that wanted to separate from our bodies. We let go. Patricia started screaming then. She was pointing at her hands, at her body. Her skin was losing color. Not getting pale, actually losing color. Like the pigment was draining out of her body, flowing into something darker underneath. And Morrison started speaking. In Cherokee. Fluent, perfect Cherokee. In a voice that wasn't his voice, using words he'd never learned. "The mountain remembers. The mountain hunts. The mountain takes what does not belong." It repeated over and over, Morrison's mouth moving, but his words weren't his. Running Deer gathered all of us, Patricia, David, Morrison, and me, and said something I'll never forget. "It's hunting you because you climbed the mountain. It's hunting me because I didn't prevent the violation. And it will hunt each of you in different ways because you are useful to it in death." Around 5 a.m., as the sky started to lighten just slightly, David Winters made his choice. He started running down the mountain. He ran despite his shadow pulling backward. He ran with tears streaming down his face. And his shadow. His shadow ran in the opposite direction, and between his body and his shadow, David started to tear. We couldn't stop him. We tried, but we couldn't. We heard him screaming for about 200 yards. Then we heard nothing. When the helicopter finally arrived and we brought up emergency medical personnel, we found David at the bottom of the first ridge. His body was fine, no broken bones, no visible injuries. But his shadow was gone, completely gone, and David's body was absolutely motionless. His brain was dead, his heart still beat, his lungs still breathed, but there was nobody home anymore. Running Deer finally told us the truth as the sun started rising. He pulled out an ancient book written in Cherokee and showed us passages translated into English. The book describes something called the Watcher on an entity created over 1,000 years ago through a ceremonial binding of 120 shamans. It was designed for a specific purpose, to protect sacred burial grounds, to punish those who showed disrespect, to extract the shadows of trespassers and add them to its own power. "It doesn't eat flesh," Running Deer explained. "It eats shadows. It eats the part of you that makes you. When your shadow separates completely from your body, your consciousness goes with it. Your body survives, but you don't. How do we stop it? Patricia asked. Running deer was quiet for a long time. You don't stop it, you accept it. Or you respect what it's protecting. He stood up and walked to the edge of the summit, facing away from us, toward the east where the sun was rising. I am going to perform the ceremony of appeasement. When the first sunlight touches this peak, I will speak to the watcher in the language of my ancestors. I will ask it to release you. What happens if it refuses? I asked. Then it will take me instead, he said simply. And you will use the moment of my death to run down the mountain. Don't stop. Don't look back. Don't try to save anyone else. Just run. I wanted to argue. I wanted to say we should try something else, that we could fight this, that science could explain it. But I looked at Patricia, her skin still partially drained of color. I looked at Morrison, speaking in a language his mouth shouldn't know. I looked at David's body, lying on a stretcher, breathing but not alive. There was nothing else to try. The sun touched Klingman's dome at 6:47 a.m., exactly 24 hours after David's first radio call about shadows. Moving wrong. Running Deer began to speak. His words were in Cherokee, but somehow we understood them anyway. He was asking the watcher to accept his life instead of ours. He was acknowledging the burial ground, the sacred ground, the ground that had been disrespected. He was offering recompense. The fog began to clear. Slowly, the entity became visible. It was impossibly tall, 8 feet, maybe more. It was shaped like a human, but it wasn't human. It was pure shadow, but it had weight and substance. It had eyes that glowed with something ancient and angry and grief-stricken. And it was beautiful in a way that broke my heart. I understood, in that moment, what it was. It wasn't evil. It was a guardian. It was a gravekeeper. It was the physical embodiment of 1,000 shamans' love for their sacred ground, their refusal to let it be forgotten or mocked. It stepped toward Running Deer, and Running Deer didn't move. He just stood there, speaking the words, and when the watcher touched him, Running Deer's shadow started to separate, to pull away, to join the greater shadow. "Run!" he screamed, and his voice was already fading. We ran. We grabbed Patricia, we carried Morrison, and we ran down Klingman's dome while behind us we could hear Running Deer screaming as his consciousness fled from his body and merged with the ancient guardian. We ran until the summit disappeared into the fog. We ran until we couldn't run anymore. The official story was that a hiking group got lost in bad weather, that one ranger died in a climbing accident, that another had a mental breakdown. The hiking group members are in a psychiatric facility now. Morrison lives in an assisted care home. Patricia came back to work, but she's different. Sometimes, in bright sunlight, her shadow flickers for a few seconds, just disappears entirely, and then comes back. I quit being a ranger 3 months later. I took a job as a weather consultant, and I've spent the last few years quietly documenting something that nobody else wants to acknowledge. There are things on high mountains that should never be disturbed. There are places where the dead are still present, still protecting their home. The 8 hiking group members are still alive, technically. Their bodies breathe, their hearts beat. But their consciousness, their shadows, their sense of self, they now belong to the watcher. Sometimes hikers report seeing catatonic people standing on Klingman's dome, staring upward, even when the visitor center says no one is there. I believe they are. I believe they're still watching, still protecting, still serving the watcher, just like Running Deer is now. If you ever hike in the Smoky Mountains or any high peaks in Appalachia, remember this. You are not just climbing a mountain. You are walking through a graveyard. The people who died on those peaks, thousands of them, over thousands of years, they're still there. They never left. They're still watching. Respect the burial grounds. Don't mock the sacred sites. Don't take pictures at the markers. Because if you do, your shadow might answer a call older than America. And once your shadow is called, there's no going back. My name is Diane Hartley, and I've been a search and rescue ranger in the North Carolina mountains for 24 years. I'm 58 years old now, which means I've spent most of my adult life hiking these peaks, pulling lost hikers out of danger, and teaching people to respect the wild. I'm good at my job. I've rescued 47 people from cliff faces and rocky ridges. I know every trail on Whiteside Mountain like I know the lines on my own hands. But I was wrong about the most important thing. I grew up in these mountains. My grandmother raised me after my mother died, giving birth to me, and my father left. Gran was a midwife and herbalist. People came from miles away seeking her healing knowledge. She knew the old stories, the ones passed down through generations about the mountains being alive, about spirits that lived in the high places, about things we should never disrespect. She used to tell me about the sisters. They live on Whiteside, Gran would say, sitting on her porch with her hands busy mending or preparing medicines. 3 of them, maybe more, old as the mountains themselves. They protect this place, Diane. The Cherokee knew about them. Your own ancestors knew. You need to understand, the sisters don't take kindly to disrespect. I was young then, smart in the way young people are smart. I thought Gran was superstitious, caught in old folklore. As I got older and became a ranger, I dismissed those stories completely. I was trained in rescue procedures, emergency medicine, survival psychology. I believed in facts and evidence, not mountain legends. I was a good ranger because I believed in protecting people from danger. I didn't believe in the danger itself, not the kind Gran talked about. October came in 1997 with perfect fall colors. The leaves turned gold and red across the mountains, and the weather cooled to crisp mornings and mild afternoons. Whiteside Mountain was beautiful that month, with its dramatic 750-foot cliff faces looking impossibly high against the clear sky. The peak sits at about 2,400 feet, but when you stand at the bottom and look up at those vertical rocks, it feels like you're looking at the edge of the world. That's where everything changed. I remember the day I found out. I was at the ranger station in Highlands, finishing paperwork on a routine rescue from the week before. Sarah, one of our desk rangers, knocked on my office door with a strange look on her face. "We've got a situation," she said. 4 college kids went up Whiteside last night. Planned a night hike. 2 of them came back down around midnight, completely panicked. The other 2 haven't come back. I set down my pen. Night hikes weren't unusual, but most people avoided them. The mountain is dangerous enough in daylight. In darkness, with fog rolling in and your flashlight making strange shadows on the rock, it becomes a different place entirely. "What kind of panic?" I asked. "Injured? Lost? I don't know," Sarah said. "These 2 kids, Jenny and Marcus, they could barely talk. They kept saying something about lights and voices, and I don't know. They don't make sense." I was already standing. I grabbed my pack. I keep it ready for emergencies, always have, and headed for my truck. This was my job. This was what I did. But as I drove the winding roads toward Whiteside, I had a feeling I couldn't quite name. Not fear exactly. Something older. Something like recognition. The fall air was cool when I arrived at the parking area. The sun was setting, painting the sky orange and purple. I could see the cliff faces from the lot, those massive walls of rock rising up into the dimming light. I'd seen them 1,000 times, but today, something felt different about them. They looked less like stone and more like they were watching. I found the 2 college kids in the ranger station. They were wrapped in blankets even though the evening wasn't that cold. Jenny had her arms wrapped around herself. Marcus kept running his hands through his hair, pulling at it like he was trying to wake up from a dream. "Tell me exactly what happened," I said, keeping my voice calm and professional. I'd learned long ago that frightened people respond better to steadiness. "We were just mocking around," Marcus started, making a video about the stupid mountain legend, trying to prove it was fake. "We weren't being respectful," Jenny said quietly, almost like she was confessing something to God. "We had beer. We were going to carve our names in the rocks. We said really mean things about the legend, about your ancestor stories, we said." Her voice broke. I waited. "We said anything that lived up there wasn't real. Just stories from superstitious people," she finished. "We filmed it to put on the internet. Make fun of it." Something cold moved through my chest. Gran's voice came into my head. "The sisters don't take kindly to disrespect." "What happened up there?" I asked. Marcus and Jenny exchanged a look that told me they weren't sure I'd believe them. "About an hour after we started climbing," Marcus said slowly, "the fog came in really thick. We couldn't see much, but then we saw lights. Not flashlights. They were different. They moved like they were alive. And we heard singing," Jenny whispered. "Like women singing. But not a normal singing. It was everywhere and nowhere. It came from the rocks and the sky and inside our heads." "Our friends," Marcus said. "They just stopped and stared. They weren't scared yet. They were curious. Then the lights got closer, and they started climbing higher, and we said, 'Wait, come back.' But they were moving like they couldn't control themselves. The lights were holding them," Jenny said. "We could see their shapes inside the light, and the lights were going up the cliff face. And then the fog got thicker, and we couldn't see anything, and we ran. We just ran." I didn't say anything for a long moment. I should have asked logical follow-up questions. I should have started search procedures, but instead I found myself asking, "Did you see their faces? The lights? Did you see faces?" "No," Jenny said. "But I felt them looking at us. looking at us like we were insects or something, like we were so small, and they had all the time in the world to decide what to do with us. We started the search before dark completely took over. I assembled a team myself, Tom from the afternoon shift and David, our senior rescue specialist. We carried ropes, harnesses, climbing gear, flashlights, and radios. We knew the cliff area well. We'd both done rescues there before. What we didn't know was that we were walking into something that no amount of gear or training could prepare us for. The hike up Whiteside in the dark was strange. Our flashlights seemed to work wrong somehow, like the darkness was thicker than normal, pushing back against the light. We could see maybe 20 feet ahead of us instead of the usual 50 or more. The temperature was dropping fast. I could see my breath. Tom kept saying things were off. "Listen," he'd whisper. "Do you hear that?" I heard it too. The mountain was making sounds, not wind in the trees or water in the creeks, but something else. Something that almost sounded like humming. Distant, but very present, like the mountain itself was breathing. We reached the cliff face around 9 o'clock. The rock rose up above us like a giant wall. In our flashlight beams, it looked ancient and patient. That's when David said something I won't forget. "There's something weird about the rocks," he said. He was shining his light along the cliff base. I went over and saw what he meant. There were circles of smaller stones arranged in patterns along the ground. Some of them looked old, weathered by years of rain and wind. But some of them looked fresh, like they'd been placed recently. Some were circles. Others made symbols I didn't recognize. "Look at this," I said, my voice steady, even though my heart was beating hard. I reached out to touch one of the fresh arrangements. The stone was cold, much colder than the other rocks around it. It felt like ice, even though the outside air was only cool, not freezing. "Diane," Tom said behind me. His voice sounded tight. "Look up." I looked up. On the cliff face, about 60 feet above us, there was a light. Not a flashlight. It moved wrong, flowing like water instead of shining like fire. It was pale blue-white, almost silver. As I watched, another light appeared next to it, then another. "Did those kids come through here?" David asked, already starting to move backward. "Probably," I said. I was trying to think like a ranger, trying to find logical explanations. Bioluminescence? Some kind of mineral in the rocks reflecting light differently. Gas seeping from the earth and catching light? But I knew those weren't real explanations. The lights started moving. They traveled along the cliff face like they were walking on vertical stone as easily as I walk on flat ground. They moved with impossible grace and speed. And as they moved, the humming sound grew louder. Now I could hear it more clearly. It was definitely singing. Female voices, multiple of them, singing something that sounded almost like words, but not quite. The melody was beautiful and terrible, like nothing I'd ever heard before. "We need to go," Tom said. His flashlight was shaking. "Now, we have to find the hikers," I said. "Diane, those aren't hikers. I don't know what those are, but they aren't anything we can rescue." The lights moved higher up the cliff face, and I made a decision that probably saved my life and Tom's and David's lives. I said, "Climb out of here. Get back to the station. Call the state police. Tell them what you saw." "What about you?" David asked. "I'm going to try to spot the other two from a higher point. I'll stay in radio contact. If I see them, I'll wait for backup." That wasn't true. I was going to try to talk to the lights. Because even though I was terrified in a way I'd never been before, even though every instinct was screaming at me to run, I recognized what I was seeing. I recognized grand stories made real. Tom and David didn't argue very hard. They descended back down the trail, and I was left alone with the lights and the singing and the terrible, vast silence of the mountain around me. I stood there for about 5 minutes, just breathing, just listening. The singing continued. The lights continued their movement along the cliff face, dancing like they were celebrating something, or like they were waiting. Then, very slowly, they faded. They didn't disappear. They just became transparent, like they were still there but not quite in this world anymore. The humming stopped. The silence that followed was so complete it felt like the mountain had held its breath. I waited another 10 minutes, then radioed back to the station. "The hikers are gone," I said into my radio. I didn't mention the lights. "The cliff area is too unstable. We'll resume search at first light." I hiked back down in the dark, using my flashlight, listening to the night sounds of the mountain. By the time I reached the station, it was nearly midnight. The first thing I did was call Jenny and Marcus at the hospital where they were being held for observation. I didn't ask permission, I just went. Jenny was sleeping, but Marcus was awake, staring at the ceiling. When he saw me, his face went white. "They took them," he said before I even asked. "Our friends, Jason and Cole. They took them up and up, and what happened to them?" I asked. I don't know, Marcus said. His voice was very quiet, but I could feel them judging us. I could feel them deciding. And then I think they understood something. I think they realized what they'd done. And I think the sisters decided what to do. Sisters, I repeated. That's what they showed me, Marcus said, not in words, in pictures in my head. 3 of them, or maybe more. Sisters who live on the mountain. Sisters who protect it. I sat down in the hospital chair beside his bed. My hands were shaking. They're not evil, Marcus continued. That's what's so strange. They're not evil. They're just protecting something. The same way a mother would protect her child. The sisters are protecting the mountain. And Jason and Cole? I asked. I don't know, Marcus said again, but I don't think they're coming back. The search for Jason and Cole continued for 2 weeks. We found nothing. No bodies, no gear, no sign of them at all. The official report said they probably fell from the cliff and their bodies were washed into the stream system or taken by animals. It was the only explanation that made sense, but I knew better. I spent those 2 weeks in my cabin going through something I should have paid attention to years earlier. Gran's journals. She'd filled 17 notebooks with her observations and knowledge, her healing recipes, yes, but also her documentation of the mountain. And most importantly, her documentation of the sisters. The journals went back 30 years. Entry after entry described sightings, encounters, patterns. Gran had found 42 disappearances on local mountains over her lifetime. Not all on Whiteside, but on various peaks throughout western North Carolina. Every disappearance involved people who were deliberately cruel, deliberately mocking, deliberately disrespectful of the land. The sisters take care of their own, Gran had written. They are not execution, they are correction. Those who cannot learn to respect are removed from the world. Their judgment is not cruelty. It is the only kindness available for souls that cannot be taught. I read entry after entry. I learned that the sisters appeared differently to different people. Sometimes as women made of light, sometimes as shadows, sometimes as just the feeling of a presence. But they were always the same, beautiful, ancient, patient, and absolutely lethal to those who drew their attention. Then I found an entry from 3 months before Gran died. She was 87 then, and her handwriting was shaky. Diane is becoming a ranger. She will spend her life protecting people on these mountains. But she doesn't understand that the mountains protect themselves. I'm getting old. I cannot tell her what she needs to know before I leave this world. So I will write it down, and hope that one day, when she is ready, she will read it. I sat on my kitchen floor and cried. I was 47 when Gran died, and I'd been too busy with my ranger life to sit and read her journals. I'd been too proud of my modern training and my skepticism. 3 days after I finished reading Gran's journals, I found the letter. It came in my mailbox with no postmark. The envelope had my name written on it, in handwriting I recognized instantly. Gran's handwriting, exactly as it appeared in the journals. But the date on the letter was recent. It was dated October 18th, 1997, 2 days after Jason and Cole disappeared. I opened it with my hands trembling. Dear Diane, it read in Gran's familiar script. The sisters are patient, but they expect respect. You failed to teach the humans in your care. Now you must help them understand. Your grandmother, the letter was impossible. Gran had died 10 years ago. I had been at her funeral. I had buried her. But the letter was real. I could smell her on it. The faint scent of the mint she grew in her garden. The smell of the fabric softener she always used. I sat in my living room all night, holding that letter, and realized that my grandmother was still alive somehow. Not alive in the normal sense, but present, connected to the mountain, working with the sisters, working to fix what I had failed to fix. The second incident happened a week later. A group of teenagers came to the mountain. They weren't there to hike. They were there to party. I saw them setting up beer bottles, a bonfire in an area where fires weren't allowed, loud music on a portable speaker. They were mocking the mountain in exactly the way the sisters hated. One kid was actually filming it for social media, talking about how the stupid legend was fake and how he wasn't scared of anything. I hiked up to stop them, but I was too late again. When I arrived at their spot, 2 of them were running down the trail, screaming about lights and voices. The other 2 had that same empty look in their eyes that Jason and Cole had reported. The standing teens couldn't speak. They just walked toward the cliff edge like they were sleepwalking. I grabbed one of them, a kid named Tyler, and held him back, but his eyes didn't focus on me. He was looking at something I couldn't see. They're beautiful, Tyler whispered. The sisters, they're so beautiful. And they understand. They understand what I've done, what I've said about people I hurt, what I've done to make them feel small. Come with me, I said. I'll take you down the mountain. But the sisters wouldn't let him go. I felt it more than saw it. There was a pressure in the air, a presence that was saying, no, this one stays. I had to let him go. I had no choice. I walked down the mountain with the two survivors, listening to them describe the same impossible things: lights, voices, female faces made of something not quite human, the feeling of being judged, the feeling of guilt made physical, made real, made terrible. When I reported it, I reported the teenagers as runaways. The investigation went nowhere. Tyler and his friend Marcus, a different Marcus than before, were never found. Over the next month, there were 4 more incidents. The sisters were becoming more active, more aggressive. People who came to the mountain with bad intentions, bullies, moaners, people who mocked and hurt others. They were disappearing at an increasing rate. I realized what was happening. The sisters weren't just protecting the mountain. They were protecting humanity from its own cruelty, and they were escalating because humans weren't learning. By November, I couldn't pretend anymore. I went to the mountain on purpose, deliberately, at night. I brought Gran's journals with me. I brought the ring she'd given me when I was 12, the one with the mountain symbol carved into it. I brought everything that connected me to her, to the sisters, to this ancient thing that was happening on Whiteside. I climbed the cliff in darkness, and I wasn't afraid. The sisters had already decided about me. I knew that now. I wasn't a target for judgment. I was something else. I was a potential bridge. The singing guided me. The lights appeared again, but this time I didn't run. I climbed toward them. When I reached the flat area at the base of the peak, they were waiting. There were 3 of them. A woman who looked about 25, ageless and beautiful in a way that made my eyes hurt to look at. A woman who appeared middle-aged, maybe 40, with lines on her face that suggested she'd lived 1,000 years. And an ancient woman, small and bent, with eyes that were infinitely tired and infinitely kind. They weren't completely solid. They were made of something like light, like energy, like the shimmer of heat on summer pavement. But they had hands, they had faces, they had presence. "Hello, Diane," the middle-aged one said. Her voice came directly into my mind, not through my ears. "We are the sisters. Your grandmother knew us. She joined us willingly, at the end." "I want to understand," I said. My voice came out steady. "Why are you taking people? What did Jason and Cole do that was so wrong?" "They mocked the sacred," the young one said. Her voice was sharp as breaking glass. "They deliberately disrespected something ancient, something that protects all of you. They did it for entertainment, for the cameras that feed your modern vanity. But that's not why we took them," the old one said gently. "Look," and I saw it in my mind. I saw Jason and Cole in the week before they died. I saw them mocking people at school. I saw them hurting people who were vulnerable. I saw years of small cruelties accumulating into something dark in their hearts. "They were becoming poison," the middle-aged sister said. "And poison spreads. We remove it before it can infect others. You're executioners," I said. "We are surgeons," the old sister corrected. "We remove what cannot be healed." "What about the others?" I asked. "The 42 people Gran documented, what happened to them?" "Some were healed," the young one said. "Some learned what they needed to learn and were released back to the world. Some could not be healed and were removed. Some chose to stay with us, to join us in protecting the mountain." "Gran chose to stay," I understood. "She did," the old sister said. "She is part of us now. She walks these mountains with us. She helps us understand humanity. She teaches us when we are too harsh, when we misjudge. She is happy." I felt tears on my face. My grandmother was happy, at peace, doing work that mattered. "Why are you showing me this?" I asked. "Why now?" "Because you have a choice," the middle-aged sister said. "You can continue as you are, protecting humans from accidents, blind to our work. Or you can become what your grandmother became. You can help us. You can teach humans to respect the mountain, so fewer of them draw our attention. You can reduce our need for judgment by teaching respect." "If I say yes, what happens to me?" I asked. "You change," the old sister said. "You become something between human and spirit. You live longer. You see what we see. You hear what we hear. You become a guardian." "And if I say no?" "Then you retire," the middle-aged sister said. "You go home. You tell no one what you've seen, and you live with what you've learned. Your grandmother worried you would choose to run." I thought about Gran. I thought about the 47 people I'd rescued in 24 years. I thought about all the people still to come, all the hikers who would arrive on this mountain with cruelty in their hearts if no one taught them differently. I thought about my grandmother, happy at last, doing work that mattered. "I'll do it," I said. "I'll help you." The sisters moved toward me, and their light surrounded me, and everything changed. I retired from the Ranger service exactly 1 year later, in October of 1998. On paper, it was a normal retirement after 24 years of service. The Rangers threw me a party. People gave speeches about my dedication and my rescue record. But something had changed in me during that year. I could see things other Rangers couldn't see. I could hear the mountain humming with its own consciousness. And I could feel the sisters around me, present and real, even when others couldn't sense them. I didn't leave the mountain. Instead, I opened a small lodge near Whiteside, a place where hikers could come before they began their climbs. And I started talking to them, really talking to them. Not just about trail conditions and safety, but about respect, about the mountain as a living thing, about the old stories and why they mattered. Some people listened. Some people understood that they were coming to a place that was watching them, that was judging them, that had standards they needed to meet. Those people climbed respectfully, and they came back down alive and happy. Some people didn't listen. They laughed at the old woman in the lodge telling mountain legends. They came anyway, with beer and arrogance and mocking cameras. Most of them never came back down. The official reports called it accidents, tragic hiking incidents, people who'd wandered off trail or fallen from cliffs. But the patterns changed. The disappearances became fewer because more people were learning to respect what they were walking into. My grandmother visits me sometimes, not in a ghostly way, in reflections, in dreams, in the feeling of her hand on my shoulder on cold mornings. She's pleased with what I'm doing. She says I'm becoming like her, caught between worlds, serving as a bridge, helping humans understand before it's too late. I'm 73 now. It's October again, which means it's been 25 years since that first night when everything changed. My aging has slowed. I look much younger than I should. My connection to the mountain has deepened until I can almost see what the sisters see, can almost hear what they hear. I have a choice coming. The sisters know I'm reaching a point where I'll have to decide. Do I remain human and eventually die, or do I choose what Gran chose, to merge fully with the mountain, to become a guardian for eternity? I stand on Whiteside's peak most evenings now, watching the sunset paint the sky. The sisters stand beside me, visible only to me. They're patient. They're waiting. They know that eventually I'll understand what the right choice is. But for now, I'm still Diane Hartley, the ranger who learned that her grandmother was right all along. I'm still here, still protecting the humans who come to this sacred place, still trying to teach them what they need to know. Still standing between two worlds, helping them understand each other. Still listening to my grandmother laugh, pleased that her granddaughter finally learned to listen to the mountain. The sisters are patient, and the mountain never forgets.